Well, great segue. Let's jump right in. So, hi, everyone. My name is Jenny. Welcome to Miami Loop Podcast. Today's special guest is Jason Poblete. Thank you for being here,
Thanks for having us.
You are...
Welcome back to Miami, I guess you're telling me, right?
Yes, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Last time you were here, you were...
I was up in Central Florida.
Electronic.
I was in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, you were somewhere over here.
Yeah. But it looked real, though. It looked very like if I was here.
We tried.
No, it was very well. Thumbs up to the producers, by the way.
Not me.
They're doing an awesome show.
Not me.
Awesome
I
show.
can't take any of that credit. Yeah. But today you're going to talk to us about the Global Liberty Alliance, which is your organization.
Well, it's not mine.
Well,
it belongs to a lot of liberty warriors in different places. It's an organization. Yeah, we founded it several years ago up in Virginia.
Right.
And now we're in a new phase. Trying to bring in new actors and new players and get more engaged in the liberty battles in a different way. So I look forward to talking with you about that. I'm glad to be in Miami again. It's been a while. I've been away for many, many years. I have family here, though. So I've been here, I guess you can say, since the 1970s. So
wow.
Yeah.
But you visited, right? In your time in Washington.
Oh, yeah. We came here all the time.
Back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, we were married here. I was born here.
Yeah.
Baptized here. Married here. I have all our in-laws are here, my family's. So yeah, we kind of, our family came from Cuba in the 1960s. Little by little, they came out. And they settled here. Some people were sent up to Ohio. I didn't like it. It was too cold. They came back. And some of them stayed, but most of them stayed here, yeah. So we're born, raised in Miami, and spent time a while in Washington, D.C., up in Virginia. It was great. I thought I was going there for just 2 years. That was the master plan. In fact, it was the year Hurricane Andrew hit the United States. And I went up to supposedly just grad school. But then it became 4 years, and then it became 6 years. But I still always kept the Florida and Miami connection. Again, family, and you're always from here. So yeah.
It's home.
It's home. And thanks for doing this, by the way. It's an awesome podcast. Congratulations on the product. And you're going to have a lot of success with this thing. A lot of stories to share. Here in Florida, so
I hope so. We're trying our best.
Yeah. Keep it going.
What do you think about the changes Miami has been through?
You know, every time I come down here, and we come down every year, several times a year. But the last 10 years, it's just completely, the city's like evolved into something completely different than the city I knew. And it's good, I think. I think there's a lot of challenges also. I see a lot of old Miami, new Miami, Miami that doesn't really exist anymore. In the political space, which is the area that I tend to be more inclined toward. And I think things need to kind of be shaken up a bit. Not because things are not working right, but there seems to be a lack of focus, I think.
Right.
And I don't look to government for a solution, by the way, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
There's so much regulation now. And it existed back then, but they keep adding and adding and adding. In fact, it's interesting in our transition into Florida, even though we had the reputation for, one of the freest states, I got to say there were a lot of taxes, a lot of licensing and regs that we don't have in Virginia. We didn't have.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
You notice when you come down here,
right?
It's great we don't have a sales tax, but what are they sticking, what things are they sneaking into the regulations and the codes and the insurance and the this and the that?
That's true.
And they're taking out of your pocketbook another way. So there's a lot of work to be done in deregulation. And we're very passionate at GLA about property rights. I think that's pretty much a founding principle of why we do what we do. And property rights are pretty intense to the individual. That's how you become free. That's how you stay free. And I just see a lot of regs, pick. We don't have a state tax, but hell, your insurance rates are super high.
Yeah.
Very high. Our car insurance, I'll give you one real life story. Our car insurance tripled from what we paid in Virginia.
Oh, my word.
Just because of the state. And we're not even in South Florida. We're up in the central part of the state.
Right.
If it had been down here, who knows what it would have been. And we're safe drivers. So there's a lot of awesomeness about Florida, especially South Florida. There's so much potential here for growth and hopefully development in a way that keeps the communities vibrant. But I also see a lot of disparity. And it's especially if you go through Little Havana, for example, there's a lot of area there that just doesn't, like the development's not keeping up with it. And some of it's flash in the pan investment, as we call it. But others, you can tell there's something there that's just not right. Now, I'm not sure if it's zoning laws or regulations or a combination, but from our clients, people that we've advised over the years, we had many clients from Florida and here in South Florida, that was a frequent complaint. The regs, it was difficult to do business in certain sectors. It is changing, and there are a lot of new leaders, and I've seen a few running for office now with these great messages of
anyone in mind.
You've interviewed a few, and there's some running in Miami-Dade County who I think are starting to make inroads, at least waking people up. And that's something we've always said, by the way. I spent, before we created this organization, before I practiced law in the private sector, I spent time working in Congress. I spent time working at the Republican National Committee. I was there for 7 years. And the one thing I can share with folks is that the power is not there. The power is down here. And we focus too much on what they're doing up there, not enough on what's happening here.
Right.
And now we're finally catching up with that. We would always say that as conservatives and Republicans, why are we worrying about trying to fix Washington? That place is complete. And by the way, it's lost. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been that way for a long time. They've been picking our pockets since probably the end of World War II, they've been picking our pockets. And it's only getting more intense. Here's where we have the opportunity to sway and make an impact. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. Right. That's one thing that's changed about me since I left Florida and came back. I used to be a lot more partisan.
Yeah.
That's gone. I don't believe in either party. I think we have to focus on our country, our neighbors, our friends, and keep the government accountable. And if they're not working, find someone else.
Yeah.
Keep them out of our way.
Did you, while you were up there in Washington, and there still is all this divisiveness and this turmoil, how did you navigate that?
It's always been there. And I know some folks who are active in politics claim, this is, at least in national politics, this is the most divided we've ever been. It's always been that way. And maybe it depends on your time perspective. And if you go back to the founding of the Republic, and you look at when the founding fathers, and you go read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and read some of the transcripts of the congressional debates after the Republic was founded, they were pretty rough on each other back then. And they would,
true.
They'd say certain things a little more gentlemanly like. Maybe they'd go out and, in fact,
duel.
That's right. They'll duel. They'll write under pen name. You love to write.
Mm-hmm.
You have the show about writing partly, and they write under pseudonyms to go attack their opponents because it was the gentlemanly thing to do. You never attack them face to face or directly. You just make up something and write. So we've always
tabloids,
and then, so they were the first tabloids.
Yeah.
And now we're at a point where I guess when I worked on the Hill, it was going to age me a bit. We didn't have the internet.
Right.
We didn't. It was just coming online as a viable tool for information exchanging in private sector, in the government, whatever. We didn't have email that worked. The House email systems didn't talk to the Senate email systems. Everybody was siloed under the old, I don't know the framework, what the software they would use for that. But C-SPAN was a fairly recent phenomena, putting C-SPAN in there. I worked with a member of Congress who was a pre-C-SPAN member. And he was from California, from Bakersfield, California. It's an awesome part of the country. And he would share with us how putting those cameras on the floor of the House change the dynamics. For the good, long term, it was a good thing to have more government shining a light on it. But it also changed how the institution functioned because you had those cameras there all the time. Right. So it pushed the power centers maybe out away from the floor of the House because the cameras were watching. And then the internet came. And then it's... The acrimony's always been there, is my point. I saw it close up.
Maybe we just hadn't noticed.
Most folks don't really focus on government. Why should they?
Yeah.
I mean, they should, but they have other things to do with their lives.
Right.
And you elect someone, right, to go up there.
To handle it for you.
Handle it for you.
Yeah.
Not be calling each other names all the time. Maybe I'm a little cynical about it, but both parties have become very institutionalized and captive to special interests. But that's been a problem since the founding of the Republic. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, when he had retired and, John Tyler was one of his not proteges, but he was close to the family, and he eventually went on to be president, Tyler, and that whole piece of history, fascinating history. He was worried. He was asked, what worries you about the future? And that was it. One of them was special interests, the European interests, coming in here to destroy what they had done. So we're always going to have that. I just think that maybe the internet, the news cycles, which that's changing too, by the way, this format is revolutionizing how we engage in politics, how we engage in business, how we engage in information sharing. So there's no longer a monopoly, as big of a monopoly on information of things happening in Washington, because you have these great platforms that you come out, you find good guests, you're very focused, you're a school teacher, you went through that whole process, and hey, I want to take my skills to tell stories and share and talk. And that will change over time, how the body politic engages. So you can have members of Congress sitting in here with you.
That would be a lot of fun.
Well, you should. They should be in here.
That would be a lot of fun.
All these politicians here, they got to be in here with you and doing these shows and talking directly to people who are watching. And I think it's going to, over time, maybe change the tone. But that ultimately, it's up to us. Yeah. And we want less acrimony. Do we want people to do the things they're supposed to do when they get elected? Hold them accountable. You have term limits already, by the way. Every 2 years or every 6 years, you can vote people out. And you got to stay engaged. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, there's many ways to get involved. So no, I grew up around this, and maybe I'm more used to it. I don't like it when people get into those screaming matches or calling each other names. But unfortunately, it's become, much more of a problem because it grabs the headlines. It becomes sensational. Right. I think people turn that stuff off, by the way. Yeah. I think most people prefer not to see that stuff.
Yeah, I don't watch that stuff anymore.
You don't enjoy it?
No. I don't. I'm over it.
You're over it?
Yeah.
You used to be more political then? Or you like politics? Or?
I like politics from like the sidelines, like a sports match. You know what I mean? Like I like to watch.
It is a sports match.
And, cheer my person on.
That's good.
But I don't want to get involved, if that makes any sense. But I feel like in the last recent years, I kind of don't even want to watch anymore. There's a sense of disillusionment.
Most of what you see on broadcast media, whether if it's Fox News, CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, all of that, I call that mostly entertainment. Yeah. And also I think it's captive media. Because remember, they have advertisers. And who decides what to put on those screens, I believe, is driven many times by some of that, even though the newsroom would say no. But maybe it's a little different in print. But I do think there's a lot of special interests, a lot of people pushing for attention, vying for something that maybe it's still important in some media markets, but with news and information being diffused the way it is now, it's kind of almost everywhere if you want. It's so much information. I think people keep seeking out less screaming shows, more thoughtful type programming, which is not new either, by the way. I mean, if you go think back and look at, think of old shows like Firing Line or the old Bill Buckley, the old Bill Buckley shows. I mean, those type of, when Bill Buckley used to go on TV, William Buckley go on TV with somebody on the other side and just sit there for an hour
and have a conversation.
And not chew each other up and have a quiet conversation calmly. They can both disagree on something.
Productive.
Yeah, and give people something to think about.
Right.
So I think people crave that sort of thing. And this platform lets you do that. Other platforms also. And there are people who just, like you, most people, in fact, when I worked at the Republican National Committee, we were there from the mid-'90s. So that was the year that I started the year before the Republicans won the majority in Congress for the first time in almost 50 years or whatever it was. It was the first time we had that supermajority. And there were other races that we won as well across the country. And one of the decisive tools in that operation was something called GOP TV. And it was a TV station that was put together by the party. I mean, people thought when Haley Barbour did that, back then he was the RNC chairman, he went on to be the governor of Mississippi, and folks know that, GOP TV was a tool that was used to get around that noise in Washington, and they broadcast shows on public television.
Wow.
Free. It was not free. I mean, taxpayer pays for that.
Right.
But there was placement of these programs with the GOP message on television. And that became a tool to kind of, again, tell the story. Now, I mean, we didn't have the internet as a really effective weapon back then. Weapon. I like weapon. It's politics. It's politics.
I understood it.
It's politics. So we could say weapon every now and then. It's a tool. So now we have them. So you have a lot more opportunity to get out there. So no, the long answer to your question, it was something you just get used to. Do I like it? No, we don't. But it is, politics is a full contact sport.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
It's a politics. I'd rather argue with words and ideas than with guns.
Definitely.
So, and violence. So we want to. That's what's so wonderful about our democratic republic, is that constitutional republic, is that we can get out there and debate our opponents. Mm-hmm. We should be able to do that freely, even if it offends people, as long as you do it respectfully. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Definitely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What would you say to those people that are very partisan right now? And, we see people losing friendships, family members, because they believe in a certain party or in a certain person.
I mean, I think that's, for those of us who grew up, for example, like my family is Cuban, very divided. Yeah. By what happened in the 1950s in Cuba. And it predates 59, by the way. So the issue, the conflict in 59 was really an apex. It was the last straw, if you will, of decades of politics dividing people. Yeah. And we grew up in a household where, at least in my house, where you were taught to respect people who you disagreed with. You came into our home and we didn't have black, we didn't have white, we didn't have yellow, we didn't have green. People had names. You treated people with respect, human dignity. And I think in politics, I mean, not just the United States, there's been this erosion of, I think, we're looking for things outside the realm of, I guess, what's, it's not going to be a special message coming from Washington to tone things down. I think a lot of this begins in our homes, is the reason why I'm saying that.
Absolutely.
It begins in our homes. And we have to teach our children and be engaged in our communities. And if we find a political person that we don't like because they're being divisive, and by the way, here in Miami, some of the stuff I see every now and then I just take a peek at the county meetings and I mean, come on. Some of that stuff, no. It's just, I mean, it's just how these people still I mean, we did a show with y'all recently about that. Yeah. How are some of these people still in office?
No, it's a big mystery.
I don't know. It's very odd. So I think you have to keep your folks accountable. And as far as partisanship goes, like I mentioned to you earlier, yes, I'm a Republican, but I'm not a Republican partisan. I believe in the vision of the party, smaller government, less regulations, property rights, freedom of speech, all that basic stuff.
All the great things that make a nation great.
That's right. No collectivism and all that other stuff. But I don't choose someone I support because they're Republican.
No.
And that's not how I was maybe 30 years ago.
Really?
No, yeah. I was and I still, I worked at the RNC. I mean, I was like,
right.
I was in there, Republican Revolution, but I learned a lot. When I spent those years at the RNC, it was 7 years of my life I'll never trade for anything.
Wow.
The least paid, Sorry, guys. But I got to travel the country. I got to see races in different parts of the country. I learned the richness of our nation, how we fight in different parts politically, in a good way. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gives you context. And in Congress, by the way, for my I'm pretty, you put me on a scale, people think I'm like, I don't know, I'm right of, I don't know, pick, I don't know. You know me well enough to know how conservative I may or may not be. But in Congress, remember, and this happens here too, local, local, state, everywhere. If you want to move product, which is votes, all right, you can only do it with the people you have there. So all the, my fellow conservatives who just start railing against people because they maybe didn't vote a certain way or do that, well, elect the right people that you want to vote the right way and get them up in Congress. By the time it gets to Congress, it's like the canary in the wind. That fighting that you're talking about that we all really dislike, well, we're sending people up there that are reflecting us. Remember that. That's what I learned at the RNC. That's the one thing I'll take away from the RNC and traveling the country and seeing things. Miami guy being plumped into San Diego or Bakersfield or Chicago, Illinois, or up in Delaware, or down in Texas, or, Georgia, New York, upstate New York, with the campaigning upstate New York. And you see it's a reflection of who you're sending somewhere. So don't forget that those people that we elect to Congress are a reflection of voters. Exactly. So you really have to kind of think through, but they did that way. Yeah, but they're representing supposedly their constituents, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a lot of that, why people get turned off by it. Some of it is the personalities. Some of it also is folks just don't really have time to focus on this. I mean, I'm a political junkie, I guess you can say. I love this stuff. It's in my blood. In fact, nobody in my family's political either, by the way. They didn't like politics. No, my grandfather was my inspiration to become a lawyer, my grandfather. He always said, stay away from politics. Good people don't go into politics, he said.
Oh my gosh.
Remember where he came from.
Yeah. I say that because that reminds me of my grandfather, he was a political prisoner in Cuba.
Yeah, you mentioned
and he used to say there's no such thing as a good politician. I was like, what?
Well, imagine your grandfather. I mean, he was there during some really tough times.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much time did he spend in jail?
I think almost 4 years.
That's 4 years too many.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are very special people, by the way, political prisoners. And the fact that you had that upbringing, and I think most Cuban Americans who know something about their past have a healthy respect for, and they know that you have to defend freedom no matter what, but also it's not this zero-sum game all the time. Mm-hmm. But we all have a healthy skepticism about politicians because of what our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents lived through. And at least for me, I'm first generation, so I was born here first from the crowd that left in 59, in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. For us, we were really intensely raised around the whole, Cuba thing. Yeah. Miami was intense on Cuba. Today, this is child's play. We don't do anything here today, compared to, we're talking about hunger strikes. I'm going to tell you a quick story about that in a minute, but my very first political event, and this was just kind of, it shocked me. And I think it's still one of the most seminal events I think I ever participated in. Impacted me ever since. It involves political prisoners. But we were raised around that whole culture. So the first generation, you have to succeed. You got to go to college. They drove us hard. My wife and I were,
It was drilled.
Old school. And that, I think, I'm glad to see it's continued in subsequent generations because they keep leaving a place that's not the happiest place to be. It's sad when you think about it. But it was intense. The politics here is funny because everybody talks, the Cuba fight here. The usual, the debates. Well, my very first Cuban exposure to diaspora politics was a hunger strike on 8th and 27th Avenue. I didn't go on hunger strike. But there were about, I don't know how many men and women underneath some tarps right there. There used to be a bank on 8th and 27th, right into Little Havana. There were all these people on hunger strike. I didn't know what that was. So my dad took me out there I don't know how old I was, maybe 13 or 14, and goes, this is why we left. And you're seeing these men and women underneath these tents with IVs, some of them, because they hadn't eaten in days.
Oh my
And
God.
hundreds and hundreds of people there every single day. Now you're lucky you can get a crowd of people for, I don't know, just about, maybe July 11th, maybe there was some crowds. But back then, you're talking about the whole city would be shut, the whole old Little Havana would be shut down. There'll be...
That must have been impressive.
Well, you met political prisoners.
Yeah.
Met people like your family members who lived through that. And those men and women, there's something about them. And you hear their stories. People like, that we don't talk about these people anymore, like Armando Valladares. Mm-hmm. He's still around, against all hope. We're talking earlier about Antunes. Antunes is here now, but he spent almost 20 years in jail in Cuba. There's Oscar Elias Bisset, who was, I think he's the first and only Cuban political prisoner who, he's still in Cuba, and he has the Presidential Medal of Freedom. George Bush awarded him that medal. And he had to have it given to him post his release, and only after years. President Bush was out of office, so you had to wait a while. But he's back in Cuba still. Materazzi Roque, you got so many of them, Blazing White. I could name, I'm going to miss them, so I don't want to leave anybody out. There's a lot of people. And those people are still, now there's a new generation of political prisoner. So here in America, we have it good. We should be very grateful for the life we have here.
Yeah.
That we can speak our minds and engage in this type of conversation. Because over in places like that, they still don't have it. And they probably never will, at least not anytime soon.
Yeah, unfortunately not in the foreseeable future.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's rough to talk about.
It's very rough. I stopped saying no next year.
Yeah.
I think that it's in a, your family is connected to the island also. Mm-hmm. And whether you have loved ones there or not, doesn't matter. The sort of scars that leaves. Now, I believe scars make you strong. So I think, that's my grandfather and my dad's way of, that's how we were raised. No, that's just, you're being put to the furnace. All right? If you want gold, you got to melt it. So it's still, though, repeating itself so much. And I have a lot of friends in Cuba that I know they probably will not stay. They want to stay. They want to stay and fight. But at some point, how long do you keep someone out there? You can only take so much. And that's what's been perfected, by the way. A system has been perfected that not only finds a way to stay in power, but that makes it easy for people to leave.
Right.
Because it's basically now that the path of least resistance is to let them expose themselves. They're fichao. Mm-hmm. And once they get fichao, they have a system, and we can document this, of how the machine just breaks you down until you decide to leave or die or go mad. And I've seen all three, by the way. I've seen all three. I've had friends locked up. I have friends that are still locked up. And it's people who give of themselves to do things that some of us wouldn't even dream about doing. But they come out broken when they do come out. And those that stay and fight, and they need our support. They don't need talking points. They don't need Twitter campaigns. They just want support. But if we're not going to help them, then we do have to start looking at how to do what we say we're going to do better, because we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect it to get better. We've been doing the same thing for how many years? Decades?
Yeah.
So we either allow this to peter out, which it won't. I disagree. It's not going to peter out. Or we lean in. And some of us want to lean in. We don't know what the answer is. I don't agree with what Obama did. I'm sorry. That's not the way I would have approached it. But I give him credit for one thing. I've said this before many times. At least he brought a reorientation. Made people think. I didn't like the way they did it. That's not how you... and then, by the way, there's a law in the books that technically has a roadmap in place for certain things that we didn't do, that we should have done. But I think if we have a U.S. interest first approach and focus on those things, the Cuban people will have to figure their future out on their own.
Yeah.
That's a very tough pill to swallow for many people in our community. They don't want to talk about that.
But do you think that's because the U.S. has had such intertwined history with Cuba?
It's
that
very
it's
close.
Really hard to say, well, you're on your own.
That's a good question. We can't, because of geography, we're destined to be working together, whether we like it or not. Our founding fathers grappled with Cuba.
It's not 60 years ago. It's not, 50 years ago. It's a long winding history of interactions and political gains and a lot to unravel.
I mean, what do you think? I mean, some of our founders thought about Cuba should be a state. Mm-hmm. Some of the...
Well, my father says a joke that he's like, if things had been different, we would have been American.
If Puerto Rico had been Cuba, not the other way around.
Exactly. So that's the answer he gives to everything.
But the one trauma, and I forgot who told me this, it'll come to me, someone here in Miami, either one of my former professors or a professor, makes a good observation on this issue. Fidel came to power and he exploited something that he could have done good with it, except he did something evil with it.
Yeah.
It was an ultimate betrayal, because not only did he take that history from 1902 through 1959, take all the politics, that emotion that he knew was there, that alleged frustrated nationalism that Cuba, some people say, has always had, and did something very sinister with it. Okay? He shifted her into a very dark place. He betrayed the trust of the voters, right? Or the people who pushed him there. I don't believe this narrative either about that he was this romanticized notion that he somehow came in there. No, that's another topic for another show, but the whole way he came to power, I think, has been...
That we've been told.
Glamorized. Yeah, I think it's been glamorized to the point that the whole books that can be written about that. And some of that's almost farcical, frankly. But yeah, we're destined to be working together to figure out how to fix stuff, right? And I think it's a good thing. I think that's a common ground that we have to focus on, that we don't focus on. Some of that, frankly, is a lot of pain. And one of the projects that Global Liberty Alliance has teamed up with another organization called Cuba Archives, that great person working there, Maria Werlau, she's been on that for a long time, 20 plus years, is a truth, reconciliation, and accountability project.
Wow.
And it's one of the things that we don't talk much about, but in governments in transition, we have many good lessons from the Cold War to draw from. But within the Cuban community, including the diaspora, if they want to be involved in that, and there have been many efforts to do this. There's an organization called Concilio Cubano with Father Edia, who used to be he'd make a great guest, by the way, Father Edia. You should bring him. He's a good...
Father, if you're listening.
Father Fernando Edia. I'm gonna make sure you bring him on. He's an awesome guy. So he used to be the director of La Mitad de la Caridad.
Oh.
Yeah, and he used to be... That
place, as you know, is so special.
It's a special place. It still is. And he just retired from the priesthood. He's on our board. He's one of our advisors. But he has a group that he was involved with back in the 80s that tried to bring together all these different ideas and organizations to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about that pain? Okay, how are these communities going to heal? How are we going? Are we going to have a truth commission? Are we going to have reconciliation? We got to have. Some of us think we got to have both. You can't have reconciliation without truth.
Yeah. And
you have to figure out, how do you put those nations on a path to a healing process? In fact, look at America. How the Reconstruction after the Civil War was handled. There's many lessons in there about how the Civil War, post-Civil War, and that whole Reconstruction period, how that was handled. And they grappled a lot with, of course, it was unique to America, dealing with an institution that caused a lot of harm to the African American people. But they dealt with it. Was it perfect? No. But there's many good lessons there about
Right.
what you should and shouldn't be doing when a nation has a bloody war like that. Cuba hasn't had a reconstruction or reconciliation or rebuilding process. So there's a lot of groups that have been studying this. Our organization believes that we need some structure or set of a process of some sort so that people can either air this out. And by the way, what that means for one people may be different from what it means to another nation.
Right.
So Cuban people got to do that. But I don't know how you do that unless you talk to each other.
And the Cuban people are an interesting group because we're so diverse, uniquely diverse. You know, you had, and I think this applied more to, you know, half a century ago. Now it's more mixed, but you really had your neighborhoods of Los Chinos, you know, the Chinese immigrants and the Italians and the Jews and the Spanish,
The Lebanese.
and everybody it was always like, that's a white issue. That's a Chinese issue. No te meta. At least those are the conversations I recall that, you know, my grandparents would hear, that even though it was very together, it was also very divided. You were told, like, that's none of your business. Don't get in there. So it's definitely interesting. I feel like the cultural aspect may play
It does. It plays a huge role because Cuba had, even before the revolution in '59, it was struggling with some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it had its own issues. I believe a lot of it was economic also. I think some of it, I tend to look at issues more through the economic lens, and you see different socioeconomic. And there were issues there. Cuba wasn't perfect, but it wasn't also this horrible place.
It was thriving, right? Like under all the measurements,
If you look at the data, if you don't, and for what we knew, yes. And was it a perfect place? No. But I think Cuba was muddling its way through it. Cuba is either uniquely cursed or uniquely blessed, depending on who you're talking to, about its location, its relationship to the United States, it's all of that. But I think there's plenty here to do now. We're talking about 59, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. Now we have a new generation leaving, and they're restarting life here. Yeah. So we have 60 plus years of socialism, institutionalized socialism. That's a lot of time. That's more than a generation. And at some point you have to tell yourself, okay.
And how do you undo all that damage?
You're not going to undo it. I don't think we can do that in our lifetime. No. And a lot of this comes back to what's next. So one of the classic debate in Cuba, American politics, do we have engagement? That's what the Democrats and the left want to do. Or just say the left, not the Democrats. It's more with our Republicans in that camp also. Or do we keep no engagement and you just have a strong policy? Well, look, I'm going to share with you here today something that's going to offend maybe some people on both sides. But it's a big lie that we've been talking about since 1992, that somehow we have this comprehensive, all-encompassing embargo on the Cuban people. That's nonsense. And I could prove it. It's in the law. So there's 3 laws. The 1992 Cuban Democracy Act, the 1996 Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act, which is Helms-Burton, and then there's something called the Trade Sanction Reform Act, which is the law that passed in 2000 something. I think it was 2000. And those 3 laws taken together did, in theory, 2 things. Supposedly, you clamped down on the embargo and made it really hard for Cuba to do stuff. But at the same time, you set something in motion that you want to help the Cuban people. You don't want to hurt them with the sanctions. Well, folks, you can't do both. Mm-hmm. We've been doing both, in theory, since 1992, since the Cold War, and we're still welcoming people over here from the oppression, right? So what's Cuba's probably number 1, number 2 source of economic income right now? Well, you know what that is.
Yeah.
Remittances. So we've created a remittance monster, a dependent society. We are helping prop that system up with every penny we send to Cuba. Now, when some of us who were working in Congress back then would say, cut the remittances, Let's get back to politics a minute. The politicians down here didn't want to do that. No. Well, it's going to hurt the families. Mm-hmm. I agree. It could hurt, even though I think who really hurts the family is the system. But if we're sending money to the system...
How does that help the families?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like a chicken and an egg problem.
It's a lack of leadership problem.
That's true. Yeah.
It's people who... Okay, look. Let's just... In hindsight, it's easy to be critical. All right? But I can tell you that I did my master's thesis on criticizing that law for that very reason. Wow. So it's in print. It was published in 1995. Yeah, published in 1995.
Isn't that like the special period in Cuba?
It was during a periodo especial, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Which was like that terrible time period where you could not find anything. Even if you had the means to purchase things, you couldn't find things to purchase.
Exactly. But then what did we do? Okay. So in theory...
You're like making me connect the dots right now. Hold on. I'm having like a huge revelation.
Well, I mean, we'll think of the Cuban Democracy Act briefly, so we're not going to get too technical about this. I don't want to bore your viewers with this. But that law did a few things. Yeah, it had a lot of tough talk.
Right.
Cold War was over. We were going to galvanize allies to help us do certain things. Yet, if you read the fine print of that law, we should put in the program notes. I want people to read it.
We can.
It's very short. I'll send you the links. It's a very short law. I'll put the links up for you. Guess what we did? We eased sanctions on telecommunications. And we licensed eventually giving Cuba fees for reconnecting phone lines. Now, maybe that made sense. So we're now paying. So when...
Is that when those calling cards?
That was before. No, that was after that.
That was after. Okay.
This was like at the infancy when the Cold War was. And look, in fairness to the drafters and to people who were involved with it, I knew a lot of them, and some of them are no longer with us. They thought it would be a good idea after the end of the Cold War the Berlin Wall had already come down, right? Mm-hmm. To come up with a new policy. And we needed one. The country needed one. But the big debate then was, how do we do it? Do we go more sanctions? Do we squeeze them during the special period eventually? Or do we start throwing them a lifeline? Now, down here, that law was sold as get tough on Castro.
Yeah.
But if you're giving Castro money, just because you want to reconnect phone lines, how is that being tough? You're giving them a lifeline.
Yeah.
Remittances. Okay, so here's something else. If anybody remember, remittances to Cuba are what oil is to Iran, a moneymaker. So we have decided through our elected officials, through the laws that we passed, to send money to Cuba. And then guess what? After the phone calls, guess what happened? Then began the airplanes, the flights. The flights were not supposed... So the second law that was passed, the Helms-Burton law, which was supposed to be something that, if it had been correctly applied, like the president was told by Congress, we asked you to do this, enforce it, but they didn't. And that's tough, by the way, to instruct the president on what to do or not do on foreign policy is not easy. But there was a roadmap there. Get the cooperation of our allies around the world to adopt our Cuba policy. Settle the property claims, the billions that were stolen from American citizens. A bunch of things. You were too young back then to remember this, but there was a nuclear power plant down there, the Hurawa nuclear power plant. You probably remember they had to shut that thing down. It's a Russian nuclear power plant in Cuba. So there was a lot of things that were in there that supposedly were closing the loopholes for that first law that was passed 4 years earlier. And the only reason that law, the second one, passed was probably because the tragedy of Brothers to the Rescue.
Oh,
when those 4 men were killed by the regime. And I think that set the tone about where they thought. I was doing Bill Clinton, and Castro said, "Oh no, we're not." Or Raul actually gave the order, but that law was signed. It almost didn't become law. But guess what that law also did? And it opened more loopholes into the law. And then the flight started, and the law was never enforced as Congress intended. And now you pretty much have a multi-billion-dollar industry keeping the system going. And the system adapted. Yeah. And they learned our immigration laws. and they figured out how to. I think it's untenable, and it's not right for us to continue down that road. I do not agree with engagement without, with the way that they did during the Obama administration. But I also don't believe that what we were doing was working. Mm-hmm. We didn't even try, frankly. So I think it's a good time to reassess, Republicans, Democrats, anyone who cares about this issue, to figure out some of it is truth and reconciliation, but a lot of it's significant, bigger issues. Florida, the economy. It's not just Florida either. It's Texas. It's Louisiana. It's Alabama. Right. The trade impact is significant too. And that's a subject for another show, but it's more economic, I believe, more economic than political, I think.
Yeah.
The solution.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's...
It made you think about the special period?
Yeah, you gave us a lot to think about. Yeah, it's hard because, for example, I've never been back. And I, never say never, but I don't see myself going back in the foreseeable future. I know my immediate family, no one has been back. Just, and a huge part of it is not to feed into this crazy regime, right? That's just going to take our money. But I do know people that it's almost like their lifeline to go back and see their family members and
I grew up in a household.
Be able to take them their medication.
In fact, you could do that now, but when I grew up,
yeah.
in my house, you didn't even send aspirin to Cuba.
Right.
That's how I was raised. No, they made a choice. It was rough to hear that.
They stayed.
Because they stayed.
Yeah.
They wanted to fight that.
Yeah.
And maybe your uncle was involved in something that did bad to me. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this. So some of this has become natural.
Right.
It's people are dying. And maybe that's part of that process that we have allowed certain things to happen. But I refuse to do that. And I think that's why we, in part, created this organization, which for the first time I ever engaged with people in Cuba directly.
Wow.
Lawyers, independent lawyers, human rights activists. I had never done that. That was completely new to us. I had always had contacts there, friends, family members, those who talked to me, some wouldn't talk to me. I thought I was no, you're too political, we can't talk to you. But we decided a few years ago, says, you know what? We have to figure out what's going on down there. And there's no better way than just finding like-minded lawyers who just believe in the profession and want to do good, and human rights defenders who want to engage in some of that, and support them. If they're willing to risk something, we would support them. And we did it. And it became a fascinating lens into what Cuba really is.
And I have a silly question for you.
No, that's no silly question.
But I have to ask.
Ask.
Do those kind of people exist in Cuba?
All over the place.
Okay.
Our network of independent lawyers, I gotta be careful because maybe
we don't want to
some people will be watching who probably will try and figure out who's he talking about. But I can say comfortably that across the island, there are people who are deeply passionate about improving the life of their families. They want to own homes. They want to be left alone. They're tired of politics. In my space, where we tend to work more with lawyers and human rights defenders, these are men and women who day in and day out go off and help people, sometimes for nothing.
Yeah.
I have a lawyer that I'm not going to say her name because I can't. But when we first approached her about doing this sort of work, helping us people who've been unjustly detained, or anyone in need of dispute deconflicting, because I can share something with you about that and give you some context. It's not just about getting people out of jail. It's a little more robust.
Right.
And I asked her, okay, so what do you need? And because we have a contract, we do things like we treat them the way we treat We partner up with lawyers all over the world, not just Cuba.
That's so cool.
So we say, okay, well, here's a contract, and this is what we can do with you. And if you deliver, we pay. If you can't, we don't. We move on. It's like we do something with a lawyer maybe in Nicaragua and Honduras, Brazil, or I work with my peers when I was in private practice all the time doing transactional work. We'd team up with lawyers. That's how we treated them. Remember, respect, dignity, property rights, contract. Show them that they're valued and you're going to keep your word and that contracts mean something. That's an alien concept in some parts of Cuba.
Yeah.
Because the system has created this culture of distrust for decades. And you know what this lady wanted? A pen and a pad of paper. And I said, wait a minute, I'm asking you, you're writing a memo, we're going to team up on a case. What else do you need? No, I just need a pen and paper. I'll take care of the rest. She'd walk in 90, 95 degree weather because she couldn't afford a car and didn't want to take money we would give her a stipend. She said no. To go to a jail to get information on one of her clients. And she'd walk all the way back. So that's been the norm in Cuba, at least in the few years we've been doing this. We have seen a lot of people that just want to retake control. They're tired of politics. All of them, for the most part. They just don't want to deal with it.
That gives really a lot of hope. Because and I guess it depends on what lens you want to look down into. But there's this sentiment, right, that Cuba is just, everything's messed up and everyone's a communist. And
that's not true. No. In fact, I got to tell you that, well, I mean, a communist, you do have your diehards. Yeah. There is no doubt about that. But my experience with folks in Cuba, and like I said, I had never done that before. And that was a critic that my opponents always had. Well, you got to try it. How do you know? If you've never been there. And I've never been there. I'm open to going as long as they don't lock me up. I have represented an American, by the way, who's locked up down there. She's from Miami.
Yeah.
Alina Lopez. She's from Miami. She's down here. And she got locked up for something she didn't do. But I have found over the last few years that we've been talking to folks and working with people there, that there's more people that, at least in our little space, who want to stay, wish they could stay, but are losing hope that there's any good that will come of what they're doing. That is true, but I think it's more economic than ideological. The politics, culturally, it's going to take decades, I believe, to deal with that, because you have whole generations that were raised now under that system. You can't just disconnect.
They don't know anything else.
That's all they know. That's
and the
all
older
you know.
generations that would tell you this is not the way it's supposed to be, we're losing them.
And we also can't impose our way on people.
That's a big one.
Well, we can't.
Yeah.
That's what our policy used to be.
Right.
And it's a policy thought that happened in the Cold War. And we can't export democracy. I mean, look at the disaster of Iraq. Look at the disaster of Afghanistan. Look at the disaster. I mean, come on. Either we commit to something or we don't raise hope. So why do we keep raising hope of people just 90 miles away? And it's not just Cuba. I mean, Nicaragua has these problems now. They've had them for a while. Venezuela has gone down this way. I have friends in Bolivia. I have friends in Paraguay. In fact, I was talking to a lawyer in Paraguay last week about what's happening down there. There's a war out right now to destroy private property rights throughout Latin America. And there's also a war against religion all the way throughout Latin America. And it's intense. And unlike the 59 Cuban Revolution, where it was quote unquote violent, it was, but it was especially violent after they took over. The big purges that came, that we still don't have accountability for and that we need. Now they're getting a little more clever on the left. They're using law, quote unquote. They're using regulations. They're using the media to crush opposition. And that's part of our mission, is to find people in these countries that want to stay and push back and fight them on their turf. And there's a lot of people that want to do it. So when we're Americans over here complaining about illegal immigration, okay, by the way, I was one of those people. Well, what did I do? I went down there and looked around. What do you see? Poverty. You don't see respect for property rights. You see regulating people to death. You see estates that are growing to create collective cultures. Well, don't complain about illegal immigration if we're not going to go down there and do this work and back people up who want to stay in their country and fight. I mean, we do this with lawyers, and we have a team of lawyers in Guatemala that we worked with that they were just totally, by the way, our government sometimes works against us in these battles because there's a wing of people who want to see a globalist, collectivist process in a lot of these countries. So your tax dollars get used for some of these experiments in these countries. But there are people there who want to fight. And I think we need to support them. If we want to complain about immigration, illegal immigration, we want to complain about child trafficking, which we should because it's horrible, slave trade, which there's more slavery today than probably it's probably at a higher rate than during the African slave trade, what we have today taking place around the world with forced labor and trafficking. And we have to engage in those places with the people who want to stay there, not work against them. And not they're going to leave.
Yeah.
And what are we going to be left with? And you think Russia's not out here trying to experiment in the Western Hemisphere to create trouble for us? You don't think China's out here trying to create trouble for us? Of course they are. You don't think Cuba is a factor? Mm-hmm. Every time we go poking around in the Ukraine, you don't think...
I think Cuba is one of the key players, right? Like one of the key elements.
It becomes a piece of something that Russia and China now more has held on to exploit and cause problems. Yeah. And if we keep going around the world trying to fight wars that we can't win, because frankly, I don't think there's a winnable way in Ukraine. I think that's another let's just say, wrong-headed way of looking at the world, old way. And I'm not a fan of Putin, but it's not as if that's a surprise what happened there.
I mean, didn't he say it?
He announced this
a couple of years ago
and China kind of gave him, okay, hey, hold off until after the Olympics, but
right.
once after the Olympics, we're there with you. Let's just, so it's not as if, so the whole, that's another, getting back to Washington again, that whole war fever, all that Ukraine war fever, that's what's wrong with our government. Your government's not accountable to you. And what they're telling you a lot of times is not accurate. Just like that discussion we had about Cuba. I firmly believe that there have been whole political careers made and broken with Cuba. And same thing with all this Ukraine stuff. Up here, we don't see it. Down here, we don't see it. But when you're up there in Washington and you're surrounded by the lobbying and the money, it's hard to break away from that stuff. But that's where everything converges. And that's where you need leaders to say no, yes, no, yes. And we need more of those people. And I think in Cuba, you're right. It's part of that little chessboard that gets taken out. And then the people in Cuba, though, are the ones that suffer because of it. I think we got to start pushing back. And one way to do that, we think, is to support and back people who are going to stay there and fight, not leave. And let me ask you something, because I wasn't here when it happened. How is it that you are one day Fidel Castro, the Communist Party's favorite rapper, and then in no time you're up here at the White House singing a song and you're a celebrity? Mm-hmm. Explain that to me. I don't understand that.
I don't either.
I don't get that. Pati Vida? What does that mean? It's just like a rebranding of the Cuban. It's a rebranding of. I never understood it, and I still don't. Mm-hmm. How some people in government, not folks who don't follow politics, but how do we openly embrace somebody who's been helping the regime so quickly?
Right. Don't
we even question that? Sure, everybody can change, but those of us who criticize these groups somehow go, oh, well, Jason, you're so hard. I mean, how could you say that? I mean, how could I say that? No, you've spent all this time down there, so now they want to come here and make money, get a Grammy, make money off the suffering of the Cuban people? No, I think that's the sort of stuff we need to push back on.
Yeah.
Welcome to the battle if you're going to be involved. But you also need to be held to account for what you may or may not have done. And there's people in jail right now in Cuba who nobody knows about. Political prisons are full. Before July 11th, the prisons were full. Nobody paid attention then. We got to do a better job. And part of that's talking about it like you're doing here and being honest with ourselves and talking to people over there that we may disagree with. Not engagement, at least not for me.
Yeah.
But I think we need to engage more with people, talk more to people.
And
down
definitely
there.
ask those questions. Because to be honest with you, until you said it right now, I hadn't really thought about it.
What part of it?
How are you a successful musician in Cuba and pretty much live to tell the tale, if that makes sense?
There's a great organization called Estado de Sats, and they're online. And they're a group of, the initial artist community. You got Gorky, pouring up out of Gorky, that whole crowd, punk rock. Gorky was kind of the early musicians in Cuba, punk musicians, underground. It's a huge underground punk community in Cuba. Nobody knows anything about them.
I don't know anything about it.
Well, believe it or not, I mean, that's not my genre per se, but
No, but that's awesome.
But they're there. Nobody talks about these people, but they've been there for decades, fighting. And then this guy shows up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's in the White House.
Yeah.
So my radar went off. So I called these folks in Cuba. What's going on here? And I learned a lot about how there are accepted forms of
because we had that artist, and I hope I get his name right. Oh my gosh, Elvis Manuel. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So he was like very up and coming, but he was like a people's artist. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understood, he was up and coming because the people loved him.
Yes.
And
there's a lot of them like that down there.
He disappeared.
And many have been disappeared, and some are still in Cuba, and they have no way out.
He was 21 years old?
Yeah.
22?
Yeah.
Completely gone.
There's another one. There's a few down there, but Cuba has the Communist Party, and that's how when I tell my non-Cuban friends, look, Cuba's one thing, the Communist Party is something else, and you have to figure that from the moment you die, the moment you're born to the moment you die, it's all part of the system. Even the arts. Mm-hmm. Okay, the arts. If you go through the Cuban system, there's acceptable artists. The moment you break or say or do things that they don't find agreeable, you're in trouble.
That's it.
It's over. Folks like that. There's a lot of them nobody knows about. Religion. There's an Office of Religious Affairs in Cuba. It's pretty much a religion police. I call them the Stasi of religion in Cuba. They are there to keep an eye on the Catholic Church and on independent churches. We've done a lot of cases in Cuba on people for religious freedom, conscience and belief, the Free Yorubas of Cuba. There's many others, homeschoolers. We've helped the homeschool family in Cuba. They control, religion police, Office of Religious Affairs controls those churches. So if you're part of that group, they leave you alone. But if you're not part of that group and you're an independent group, independent church, that you don't want to register your church with the Communist Party because they're atheists, you're in trouble. They'll put the squeeze on you and the system moves in. Same way they treat you. So that's why the whole San Isidro movement, which I'm still studying, we're too quick to embrace it. I still wonder about its origins and how it came about. For all we know, it could be a Communist Party false flag operation and bring
infiltrate
and bring people out. But let's just leave it. We may never know what happened there. But that's why you saw this mixture with religious people and artists and this and that. But it was an awkward combo. But it was there. And it's just part of the monitoring process. You just got to be careful what you do in Cuba. But there's a lot of people out there willing to stay and fight. But we're not giving them a way to do it. We're not. Because they can't live in the shadows all the time. And how long can you keep a soldier in the trenches?
Yeah.
I mean, can you live there 25, 30 years doing the same thing over and over and over again?
No.
Being monitored, being listened to, being spied on. At some point, you crack or you leave. I don't blame those people for leaving. I don't blame political prisoners. I mean, Antunes, which his brother and his sister-in-law and his stepbrother.
Let's talk about them.
And the twins, the twins that were part of the Free Yorubas, are part of the Free Yorubas of Cuba. I mean, he was in jail for almost 20 years, Antunes was. And he was only forced to leave because he was worried about something that had happened to a family member of his, one of his children, an infant. So not only did he live through that, his theme was Ni me callo ni me voy. That was his big claim to fame, his moniker, his battle cry was Ni me callo ni me voy. But how long are you going to ask someone after they have spent almost 2 decades in a prison?
Yeah, they've been broken down.
He still stayed and fight. But then you talk about his baby. Come on. You got to let your 2 little girls, I mean, you saw somebody doing it to your 2 little girls. What are you going to do?
It's over.
It's over. It's game over. Mama Bear's coming out.
You touch the part that is not meant to be, you know? You touch the untouchable, and that's when you have to, I guess, figure out what's worth the fight, you know?
Well, the system knows how to push those buttons.
They're experts at it.
Every government's an expert at it, but this one especially has perfected it.
They've got, right. They've got it down to a T. I mean, down to like the, what do they call it? The comité?
The Comité de Defensa de la Revolución, your neighborhood block people.
Right, it's like a neighborhood crime watch, but they're not watching for crime. They're watching for you, making sure you're not doing anything that you're not supposed to be doing. From who comes into your house to visit you, to what kind of merchandise you were carrying home from the grocery store, to who you were talking to on the phone.
We have clients.
Everything.
We have clients who are blocked or marcados because they hold Bible study in their house.
Yeah,
which requires sometimes more than one person. You can Bible study by yourself, but you're bringing 2 or 3 people in a room. That's it. Under the code down there, you're breaking the law. You need a permit. And we had a lot of people who said to the government bravely, "We're not going to apply to a permit to do Bible study." No. The Yorubas, they would get in trouble.
Can you explain what the Yoruba is for people that may not know?
You mean the Free Yorubas of Cuba? It's a belief system. Mm-hmm. You mean the whole Afro-Cuban?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's an Afro-Cuban belief. Some call it a religion, and it's a syncretism, if you will, between African Yoruba
from Nigeria,
right? And it made its way to Cuba long time ago. In fact, according to the Yoruba practitioners down there I've dealt with, and even some here who we've consulted as experts for the work that we...
That must have been so cool.
Yeah, this Catholic kid going around defending Yorubas.
I love it.
It was, I was asking Father Eddie, "Are you sure I can do this? Am I all right?" But yes, it's a fundamental belief. And that's how they did it.
It's theology.
That's what they want to live.
Yeah.
And they have to be respected, and the government didn't. In fact, the experts we consulted on this, and we found this, anecdotally, I can't, there was no study done on this that we found, was that it's the one group that the Communist Party tends to be very hot and cold with. They try and keep their distance, either because of superstition, but they're very influential. But even they are divided. So there's some that are part of the system. They're part of that Office of Religious Affairs, and they have liaisons to certain babalaos and all that, so it's all very well structured. However, the vast majority of them are independent, are underground. Now, by the way, they were always ostracized in Cuban society. So pre-Castro, they were always on the margins of society. So they weren't treated the best. But under the communist system, the repression is so intense that it's most of the practitioners that we've worked with and have advised won't even manifest that they do this. So it's almost completely underground. But there are exceptions. Some of them are, Loreto and his family. They decided a long time ago, partly inspired because of his stepbrother, Antunes, Jorge Per Antunes, that they were tired of being in the shadows. And years before July 11th, would refuse, and they'd do ceremonies at their house. And the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución would get upset. They'd report them. The cops would show up. But these men and women They openly resisted. This is before July 11th.
No, let's remind everybody. In Cuba, it's not like you move and you're new to a neighborhood. These neighborhoods, you've been probably surrounded by these people for generations.
That's right.
Your neighbors are your family.
That's right.
Right? Like you see them more than you see your extended family members. And one day, the neighbor to your right decided they wanted a phone line, so they became the comité person. And now all of a sudden, this person you went to for help, this person you spent Christmas with, is now out to snitch on you.
And that's, again, goes back to how we were raised.
Yeah.
They turn, and this is something we need to think about in this country too. The system, this is not a communist country, far from it, but there are things that happen. And the pandemic was a good example. You asked me that question earlier about what happened during the pandemic. And that should be a lesson to all of us. The revolution is something very sinister. They use the family against itself. Destroy it. Destroy the individual for the collective. Destroy private property rights for the communal property rights system that Cuba still has to this very day. So anybody out there who's saying Cuba has private property, no, they don't.
They don't.
But people actually say that there's private property in Cuba. No, there isn't. Even their constitution says there isn't. So they turned against the individual and they used the family unit, the traditional family unit, to destroy them. And that's a great example about what these people go through. And
it's tough.
But these folks have decided to stay and fight. And I see these battles there, and I wonder what happened during coronavirus, by the way, where you had people turning against neighbor, snitching if they're wearing a mask or not a mask. Are they getting vaccinated or not vaccinated? Are they posting it on Facebook about it? Folks, no, don't turn on your brothers and sisters over stuff like that. That's what the government is trying to control you.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Then people think it's conspiracy theory. It's not conspiracy theory. It's a form, indirect, of social control, of some bureaucrat up there who wants to tell you how to do something. Well, you have to look at it the other way. They work for you. You don't work for them. It's your body, your mind, your home. In fact, as we move into this century now, it's going to be the biggest, I think, one of the bigger spaces we're going to have to carve out. How do we protect our mind and our intellectual property, our freedom to think and write and say what we want to say? It's coming under assault. And this new economy that's taking shape right now, what you do, for example, you should be able to talk to anyone, say whatever you want without fear that you're going to be shut down over some regulatory issue. So I think we have a lot to learn from our friends in Cuba about what not to do. And interesting, those that leave recently come here energized because they're free. They don't know what they can and can't do, but when they know they can do what they want within the law, they're free. And they're very productive, very constructive members of our society. But I'm afraid we need to also get a handle on what's happening down there, because I think that's untenable what's happening. And it's going to break one day. And July 11th was probably our only warning that if we're not careful, and I'm in a minority on this view with Cuba watchers, but I believe that if we're not careful, you're going to have a bloody war in Cuba. Brother against brother, sister against sister down there. Retributive justice.
A lot of people don't agree with you on that?
A lot of folks, experts in Washington, do not believe,
really?
At least before July 11th. They say, if they haven't done it yet, they're never going to do it. And I don't know.
I don't know. It seems like, and you may be able to shed more light on this, but it feels like Cuba's government has been able to perfect what I call the pressure cooker, which is, they crank up the heat and the pressure's building up and the pressure's building up. And then they watch out for, okay, when do we release a little bit? Like a frog in the pot type of thing. And when it's time to release, they shove a lot of people out of the country. Go, do whatever. We don't want you here. And then back to cranking up that heat.
That's exactly.
I don't know if that analogy made any sense. Yes,
it does.
That's how it works in my brain.
No, it's how it works in real life. That's exactly what they are doing. In fact, the lawyers we work with at Global Liberty Alliance, who are part of our network, those in Cuba, they tell us almost without exception, Poblete, get ready.
Yeah.
They're going to purge again, and then we'll just go back.
Yeah, and it just feels like one day they're going to miss that small window of releasing that valve, and that, like we say, shit's going to hit the fan.
It almost did. In July 11th, I think it almost did. Because July 11th was, in hindsight, it still is. I said it during the initial outpouring. It was there in 1989. You know, it was there. What we saw behind the Eastern Bloc at the end of the Cold War in different countries, starting in '89, where people just had to say enough. Their Berlin Wall moment eventually, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to take its own Cuban flavor. And I am one of the few who think that it's going to be violent if we do not do something to figure out a way. And by the way, it's part of our policy, technically, in these laws that we spoke about earlier. It says peaceful transition to democracy, right? And I think that's in the U.S. interest. I think we don't need a civil war 90 miles away from us. We don't want a bunch of Cubans killing each other. Retributive justice. And by the way, I've seen it here. I've gone into my in-laws have, this happened last year when they went into a bakery nearby here in Kendall. I'm not going to say which one. And some lady walked in that turned out to be one of those chivatos that you were talking about. And when they walked into the bakery, the lady behind the counter recognized her. And they almost came to blows.
I believe it.
They almost came to blows. My father-in-law was there when that happened. So those are the things we have to be, I think, thinking about long-term. And how do we deconflict exactly what you're saying? The pressure cooker effect. Because it just kicked the can until a crisis happens. Then July 11th happened. What the politicians do? Like with Q, like on Q. They embraced the first thing they could get their hands on, put a slogan on it. Let's have a rally at Versailles and everybody go home.
Yeah.
That's not good enough. Although we want people to get engaged. And it's so easy today for people to do stuff. You don't have to jump on a plane and go to Cuba to do stuff. Today you have the internet, you have technology, you can donate to battles. There's a lot of good groups out there. And you can help build and support people who've taken those risks. We have never had that in political engagement ever in our history. So imagine what Gandhi could have done if he had the internet.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe Gandhi would not have happened with the internet, but imagine something of that at that magnitude, the type of things you could do today you couldn't do. So there's a lot of good news, a lot of good things that can be done, but we just need to have the leaders in place and the energy in place to do it. Well,
what happened to Alina?
Well, Alina, right now I have to be a little guarded with what we say about the case, because we're still trying to bring her here, and we're making progress, and we hope to have her home soon. I hope that we will figure out a way to have her be reunited with her family. But she was caught up in, from what we know, somebody was trying to get to her husband, who used to be a Cuban diplomat within the Cuban government. He was trying to leave, basically get away from all of that. And somehow she was ensnared in something, was lured to Cuba by her ex-husband, her husband, who was somehow in Cuba, locked up. And she went. And when she was going to leave, they picked her up and threw her at Manto Negro Women's Prison, which is a very rough prison for political prisoners and not the nicest people in society at any given time. And she was sentenced to more than 10 years in prison.
Oh my God. But she's an American citizen.
Yeah, she's an American.
So,
and she's not by the way, she's not the only American. We believe there are as many as 19, according to the sources. I have from U.S. government sources that there may be as many as 19 Americans imprisoned in Cuba, some of them unjustly imprisoned in Cuba. She has a profile of a case that they accuse her of being, by the way, she was tried by a Cuban military court, which under their own laws, they're not supposed to try a civilian in a military court.
Right. How does that make any sense?
It doesn't, but that's what they did. because they consider her a spy, a traitor, or whatever you want. Come on, she's Cuban also. So they impose this arcane section of their law that technically apply to people like you and me, even though I was born here. If I go over there, I may have to travel under my mother's name, which means I got to get a Cuban passport, or technically they still consider me a gusano, even though a lot of my more progressive friends say, "Oh, Jason, that's an arcane law. They never enforce that." In theory,
until they decide
to, and I go, and I've never been there. They don't even give me a visa to go to help Alina out. That's been interesting. Hopefully someday when she gets out, we'll be able to share that story so people know what it took to get her out. But the hurdles that we have to go through in some of these cases. But technically, I'm one of these Gusano generation people. Why? Because I was the son of a person who left in the 50s, and those people in the early 60s, and those people were treated as total outcasts. So we're the technically, if I go back there, I think that law may have changed. I'm too old now, I'm 52, but they'll throw you in the army or something, or lock you up for whatever. But my liberal progressive friends say, "Oh, Jason, they don't enforce that." But in theory, yeah, that's what happens. But anyway, Alina's case, hopefully we will be resolving it soon. I got to say that the Biden administration has been helpful. And so have some members of the Florida congressional delegation. And frankly, some people in Cuba too. On human rights, there's no Republican, there's no Democrat. And when an American is in a jam, America's supposed to come to the defense of Americans. And the number one duty of the U.S. State Department is it's not the U.S. Global Department, it's the U.S. State Department, America. And that's, I believe, their very first and most important duty is the security of Americans, and that's one of them. And we have to help bring her home. She does not deserve to be there 13 years, I think, it's supposed to be her total time there.
How long has it been?
It's been more than 5 years. So if they don't extend, and by the way, her mother, 93 now, lives in Miami Beach. That poor woman, when she came to us 2 years ago for help, was flying to Cuba in her 90s to help her daughter because not even our own government paid attention. Can you believe that? Our State Department wasn't helping. An American got locked up, and a 90-year-old woman was flying to Cuba. It was a political case. It was an unlawful detention case. And she was taking food to her daughter, flying on an airplane, showing up at court, showing up to speak to their lawyers, which are from the state. And she kept doing this several different times. She would jump on that airplane at Miami International Airport, I think at 6 in the morning or 7, whatever flight that was, until the pandemic, to go to Cuba, try and get her daughter out of jail. How could we not help when they came to us? And we've hopefully, we're getting close, but we need the stakeholders to work together to bring her home. And she's not the only one, by the way. There's other Americans unjustly imprisoned. We're not representing others in Cuba, but they're not the only ones.
That's why there's more.
According to the lawyers we've worked with and even U.S. government sources, there are more, as many as 19, not including Alina. If you include Alina, it makes 20.
That's insane.
It's a large number. It's a large number.
Yeah, significantly large. And, I feel like as Americans, we live under, maybe it's not realistic to feel this way, but we feel like when we travel, we have that security blanket of we're American, right?
Okay.
They're going to come for us. Something happens to me. No. Somebody's going to show up and help me.
They won't come for you.
And they won't come
for you. I mean, in unlawful detention cases, I think it's important for your viewers who travel, and I love to travel. My wife and I love to travel. And I think folks who can do it, it's a privilege to be able to travel. It's not a right to, you have to pay, you have to learn. So we're blessed in this country. We can do this sort of thing. And in the world that we're living in, it's good to get out there and travel and visit if you can. But you need to do your homework when you travel. You should always check your State Department travel warnings. It's not just about buying online your place to go and buy your tickets and buy Rick Steve, read Rick Steve books or other travel books. Read all that. But you should also set a little bit of time to kind of learn about the country you're going to, learn about their laws, if you're going to drive, learn about what their laws are, and have a game plan. Because if you expect the U.S. government to come riding and get you out of jail, it's not going to happen. And that's not their role either, by the way.
No, it shouldn't be.
It's not the role of government to be
Yeah.
nursing and going after everyone. No, you have the freedom to travel, exercise it, but take responsibility when you travel to places. I don't recommend anyone go to Cuba or Iran. I've represented people who've been held hostage in Iran. I still do, including a resident from California and someone from Virginia, North Korea.
North Korea?
Syria. Oh, I didn't represent anyone. I'm giving you places that I don't recommend people go. So
I thought you had a client.
No. I've never.
Wow.
So the places that I caution people are places like Iran, Cuba, even Venezuela, North Korea. I help someone, represent someone who's a hostage in China for almost 10 years, an American.
Wow.
His name is Mark Sweden. I think everybody should look him up.
Yeah.
Help Mark Sweden out. His mother, who's out in Luling, Texas, she's a remarkable woman called Catherine Sweden. That lady has been waging a one-mom campaign on a fixed income. Catherine Sweden, she's a wonderful woman. You'll find her on social media. Mama Sparkles is her handle on Twitter. We can give you the program notes for her. But that poor man has been held hostage. I believe he's a hostage now. Trumped up charges, locked up in the communist Chinese gulag prison system. And our government pretty much did nothing up until a few years ago to help him. So international travel is relatively safe, but you have to have some preparation. If you're going to go to a place like China that you know locks up, or Russia, there's 2 or 3 people being unlawfully imprisoned there also. Do your homework. Pick another country, maybe. The odds of you being taken hostage or prisoner in some of these places are low, but you're still running the risk.
Right. Is that a risk you want to take?
I mean, it's up.
I don't know.
You could get. It's up to you. But remember, you're going to spend a lot of time in some of these places. You will spend a lot of time in prison. We represent 2 Americans right now who are unjustly imprisoned in Ecuador. Stevenson brothers from the Washington, D.C. metro area. Go to a website called Justice Ecuador. People will find it easily there. Go to the Global Liberty Alliance website and you'll be able to pull down some of these cases. And these 2 men have been falsely accused of committing an atrocious crime. And this is a case that gives you an idea of the sort of cases GLA likes to do, because it covers almost every variable of what we focus on. We focus on defense of fundamental rights, free enterprise, and rule of law. And here you have these 2 Americans who went to Ecuador because they wanted to have an ecotourism business. That was their dream. That's what they wanted to do. The younger of the 2 brothers, Roger John, traveled with his dad and his brother to several different countries, looking for a place to open their ecotourism place. This is what he wants. This kid comes out of college and he didn't want to do anything else. He just wanted to do his own business. And he couldn't do it here, so he looked for a place. He found land. He bought it. He cultivated the land, made it a working farm. It's a huge place. He worked with the local indigenous communities, gave them jobs. And then they came and, there was a conflict. And it seems like we can't get too much into details yet because we're still trying to sort out the case. But right. It seems to have been a dispute by locals who were upset that these African-American kids, by the way, men, were having all this success. And they were making a very rough area of Ecuador profitable and making land useful. Before, it wasn't really well taken care of. The farm was a mess. And we believe, according to the Ecuadorian council down there who defended these men and who we team with to try and get them out of prison down there, that it was just they were framed for something, a very serious crime. It was murdering 2 people, 2 indigenous peoples. But from the moment we saw that file, and this case came referred to us by a remarkable organization called the Foley Foundation. They're a good group that was started by Diane Foley and her husband to honor the legacy and memory of Jim Foley, a reporter who was slaughtered by ISIS. I'm sure you remember those cases. Remember that? Remember Jim Foley?
Wasn't he from South Florida?
Yeah, he had Florida connections also. Yeah. He had been down here for a while, but he got kidnapped by ISIS, and he and a bunch of other Americans were brutally, savagely murdered. And it was such an honor to be with Diane in federal district court in Virginia earlier this year to see one of the many people involved in the network of killing be tried for what they were involved with. Talk about justice and power. Talk about seeing the mother and father and family members of a slain American sitting in court with one of many people who were involved in the brutal killing of Jim Foley and some other people. So they reach out to us about that case, the Ecuador case, the Stevenson case. And from the moment we opened the record, we knew there was for sure due procedural errors. These men were not afforded due process. Zero. They weren't even afforded translators. They were tried on 2 different counts. They didn't stick, unrelated to the underlying charge. The judge threw them out. So they found another one and accused them of something that they did not do. And they have refused, by the way, to leave. They've been offered multiple times to leave if they would admit it. They go, we're not going anywhere. We got to get our record clean. We got to get our names clean. We got to find the people who did this to our friend. Caught. And that's Ecuador, a country that we send millions of dollars every year for foreign aid. We have paid to help train their judges. We have trained to reform their court system and legal system, and now they're using that against our own people. How's that right? Look at what happens in Ecuador, by the way, in the prisons. Just this year, right before the summer, right at the peak of the summer, a bunch of men were beheaded. Some of them had their hearts cut out. And I've seen these videos. Okay, I've seen these videos. Imagine sleeping next to people that will cut out your heart while you're awake. These men have seen these sorts of things. Okay? One of them is sleeping next to someone that has an AK-47 inside a prison. And on the other side, one of the most notorious gang members that runs drug cartels inside the prison. This was a while ago. Now they've been moved around a few times. But how is that acceptable? You can't treat prisoners that way, first of all. I don't care how bad they are. But you're letting people in a prison cut heads and cut out hearts. You just let it happen. And it's not just happened once. It has happened multiple times. You got these Americans locked up down there, and our government just sat there. Of course, it's a horror movie. I mean, look, we've been doing horrible things to each other for centuries. But remember in the Bible it says there's nothing new under the sun, right? I believe that.
I do too.
But we have tools now to do something about it.
Right. Like, you just don't think that could happen now.
It happens now, and it happens with a lot more frequency than we want to admit. And this particular case of the Stevenson brothers that the Global Liberty Alliance took on, it was evident from the very beginning that the trial, all of it, just from the transcript, you can tell. One of the prosecutors got disbarred and jailed. And these men are still there.
Oh, my goodness.
So right now, the defense counsel down there, to sum it up, they have filed I guess it's a series of motions under their legal system to have all this exculpatory evidence, including DNA, that they never looked at. They never took DNA from our clients.
So it's zero evidence.
Well, there was evidence, but it was spoiled evidence. It was evidence that wasn't collected correctly. And it was just, like, as one of the defense lawyers said to us, Jason, if this were in your legal system, these guys wouldn't even spend 2 weeks in jail.
Right.
And they're embarrassed, by the way. So these lawyers that we work with in these countries, they want to do right. And by the way, some of these lawyers are not in the same ideological persuasion that we're from, but they honor their profession. They believe it can move something in the right direction. But they're powerless because the system is so broken. So if you're an American traveling to any of these countries and buying land in a foreign country, you need to be careful. It's not a given that the U.S. will come help you. In fact, in most cases, they can't. Fortunately, there's been some new laws passed. One of them is called, has a good Florida connection also, the Levinson Hostage Recovery Act. I massacred the name. It's a lot longer than that, but it's named after Bob Levinson, who is up here. Congressman Ted Deutsch, he's up in Palm Beach area, a Democrat. big time champion of the hostage issue in the state of Florida delegation, the good guy. And he was involved in helping get that law enacted, along with many other members of Congress from Florida and New Jersey and some other states who were championing hostages. And this law now creates a new process that gives powers to the State Department and must do certain things. But it's still not a given that your case would be an unlawful detention case, because you not only have to exhaust, we don't have to exhaust, but you need to do certain things in these countries and then prove to the U.S. government that you're being held because you are an American and you're being held for reasons that go beyond breaking the law, if you will. It's a long analysis that you do, but ultimately my point is no quick fix. So if you ever get arrested, be careful. I mean, and by the way, if you're going to go to a foreign country and break the law, I mean, Griner, the whole Russia Griner case, when she broke the law.
Yeah.
Look, do I think Russia's drug laws are draconian? Yes, they are. But it's common knowledge, you can find this on the internet, that they have zero tolerance for any form of marijuana, cannabinoid, any of that. Zero tolerance, nothing. So if you get...
It's their business, right? It's how they choose to conduct their...
Right. So if you're going to travel to their country and you assume the risk, respect their laws. If you don't respect their laws,
right,
well, that's what happened to her. But that is really a lesson to take for any country you go to. But these men, they were obeying the law. They just got caught up in it looks like a political problem that's very complex. And it's a dispute that goes back decades between the indigenous communities in that part of Ecuador and the central government. And that can happen in many countries in the Western Hemisphere. So if you're not careful. Yeah. But these men are there. And one of them, by the way, I left one of the most important facts out. One of them is dying from stage 4 cancer.
Oh, my Lord.
Stage 4 cancer. And we still cannot get the U.S. government mobilized to engage directly. Yeah, well, it's rough, but it's a lesson. They're also tough guys, smart guys, good people, and they stay focused. And they stay, in spite of what they're going through, they have a very optimistic focus, and they just want justice. And of course, we don't want to lose Ronel to cancer. So that's why we've urged the Ecuadorians and we've urged the U.S. government in many different ways, directly with them. It's, we have to figure out a way to help these men. As Americans, there's no bigger duty right now, we think, in Ecuador than this. Period. They're not the only Americans either, by the way. But unjust detention, they're the only ones that I know of in Ecuador. There could be others. And there's some others in other parts of the hemisphere as well. I mean, there was a kid in Nicaragua here from Miami. I forgot his name. He's a good kid. We didn't represent him. But he was a veteran, a U.S. veteran, who was brutally attacked after the 18 de Abril movement in Nicaragua. I remember the huge uprising. This kid was tortured physically. He's had, I don't know how many surgeries. He has been hurt. I'm not sure what we've done to hold that regime to account for what they did to Americans. So there was a time when you even looked at America the wrong way. In fact, that's the way it should be. If you even look at an American the wrong way, or they do something, there should be immediate action by the U.S. government. It should never be allowed to fester to that point. Okay?
Yeah.
Period. We have a ways to go. We're getting better. Well, we have a ways to go, but things are getting better. But it's going to take some time. So if you're going to travel internationally, folks, do your homework.
Yeah, definitely do your homework.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned throughout our conversation, the GLA doesn't just focus on cases in Cuba. You are pretty much all over. Can we talk about the Brazilian-Cuban medical crisis?
Yes, that was one of our earlier cases and to give you how we work, by the way, we team up with lawyers or human rights defenders. We need to be invited into a country to work. And we team with local counsel. And then, of course, you also have to have some U.S. issue. It has to impact the U.S. somehow. So we really are very careful about case selection, of course. And we don't want the enemy to see us coming. So we're very careful where we pick the cases. But when we pick them, they have to be high-impact cases. And we had to have some team in place, local council, to move the process. And that's in the Brazil case. That was a case that was connected to the Guatemala, and it also has an Uruguay connection. And it was our initial effort to combat Cuban medical brigade trafficking in persons, which, as you know, in Cuba, you can become a doctor. Some of those doctors are pretty good doctors. Some of them are here in our community in Miami, operating, they're having their own practices. They're good doctors, some of them. But anyhow, you go through the Cuban system, and the elite of the Cuban medical school system, if you're also ideologically a militant or pure, or they think they can trust you, they'll put you in one of these international brigades. And I'm going to just go over it quickly to get to the case, but I think you need the context for your viewers to kind of follow it. And you are picked, sometimes you're forced, to serve on these medical brigades. They've been around since the 60s. And they go off and they perform I call it the weaponization of medical care. In America, you're a doctor, you join Doctors Without Borders, or you join any organization. There's many of them. We have probably hundreds of them, small and large, or doctors that go out on their own to do mission work, and they voluntarily give up their time to perform surgeries. And also, Dr. Rand Paul, for example, he goes off and he does surgeries. I'm pretty sure he still does it. And you have other doctors that do it. But in Cuba, you're put into this system, organized in a military type structure. And it's called brigade for a reason, because it's a medical brigade. And then they deploy you to these countries where they want to spread their revolution in addition to giving free medical care. So, go in there for a physical and then get a little dose of socialism while you're at it. And they'll proselytize the gospel of the gospel of the Cuban Revolution to people, and slowly, convert and spread. And if you refuse to do this sort of thing, by the way, these brigades are policed. They take away your passport. Mm-hmm. They have a minder, with an intelligence officer. So it's almost like you're exporting that Comité de Defensa de la Revolución type structure in the field of a bunch of doctors. You cannot date or fraternize with locals when you're in these foreign countries. You're under their control. And more importantly, your pay is not given to you. They give you a very small amount. Now, it's a privilege to be on a brigade. So you do receive a lot more money than the average Cuban back in Cuba. But they essentially keep, if you ask the experts, about 70 to 80% of what you are contracted out to do. So let me give you the Brazil example, and the Paraguay example, and the Guatemala example. For years, people focus on these brigades as far as people who were trying to help, shine a light on it, on the human right component of it, to show how there was this, all this, if you contract out, they're not paying you for what you're doing, they control you, take your passport away, they control you, so on and so forth. But we felt, that's good. I think it's great to expose that. If they want to speak up, that's good. But we were thinking in a free enterprise focus. Okay, we know Cuba does this. The record's already documented. Why don't we focus on the governments that are signing these contracts with the Cubans? Because, by the way, they do paper for everything. Everything gets documented. So we teamed up with a team of lawyers in Brazil. And these lawyers already had been kind of working on some of this already, but they needed to do, they wanted to kick it up a few notches. And we said, well, what about if we do, in addition to what you're already trying to do with these hundreds of doctors that were here, why don't we try and bring a criminal case against Brazilian officials for signing these contracts to begin with, and tell us where the money went? Let's use your freedom of information laws to do it. We did it in Paraguay as well. We had a lawyer in Paraguay who, she's a fighter, and she filed several Freedom of Information Act requests. We got the contracts. By the way, they're all published on our website. And we used those contracts to see who was paying who. By the way, we got them. We were surprised. You file a FOIA here, it takes months to years to get a response, if you get one in some cases. But we got the contracts. And then we used those contracts to build a human rights case against certain Paraguayan officials who had signed the contracts. And the one thing we found out that was interesting is that they weren't invoicing, the Cubans were not invoicing for their services. So Uruguay was paying the Cubans millions of dollars, but there were no invoices for the services they were providing. So we were asking for, well, where are the invoices? Because under Paraguayan law, you have to invoice. You just can't pay out without
Right.
seeing what you're paying for. So we were able to knock out one of the missions down there, not the biggest ones, but that initial one, we were able to knock out the recontracting of one of them. And the case continues. So now the prosecutor there is reviewing the cases that were presented to make sure that all these agreements are consistent with Uruguayan law, and hopefully find the people who signed these and where'd the money go? Cuban doctors didn't get it.
No.
No, Cuban doctors didn't. So somebody pocketed all that money. And these are millions of dollars. In Brazil, it was a little different. Bolsonaro and company brought a lot of these doctors. They're trying to get them licenses. They're trying to get them resettlement because they need the doctors. There's a dearth of doctors in the world right now. We need more doctors and nurses. So they needed them. Mais Medico is the program. And they've done a good job of trying to reincorporate some of these people. And if any of these doctors ever want to bring a lawsuit against the Brazilian state and the corrupt officials who did this, they trafficked in people, essentially, what they were doing. It's
Right.
modern day slavery.
Yeah.
They take away your passport. They tell you where to eat, work, and live. They don't pay you what you worked on. And by the way, then they pay some of your salary, and then they say, oh, you'll get it. But the only way you'll get it is at the end of the mission, because if you leave, we keep all your money.
And Cuba produces doctors more than they produce tobacco.
Yeah, it's a big business for them,
Yeah.
and they've been able to monetize it. And at the same time, they proselytize the revolution. That's part of the. By the way, there's a lot of doctors here in Miami, which I'm sure will gladly speak with you. In fact, one of the early doctor defection cases my wife worked on, when she worked with Ileana in Congress, and they're both working at Mercy Hospital now. Those are the first. This is back in the late '90s. Those are the first two that were removed from that process, and through them and some others that have come since, we've learned a lot more how that program is run, and that's what that GLA was involved with those cases, because we're now focusing on the countries that are signing the contract and making those countries obey their laws. I can't do anything about what Cuba's doing.
Right.
I mean, they're gonna do what they want. But these are democracies, right?
Yeah.
These are democratic republics, right? These are our friends. So why are you signing contracts that you're basically trafficking in people? Mm-hmm. That's wrong. So that's the sort of work we try to do that brings in those elements into a case.
That's genius.
No, it's free enterprise.
That's amazing. The work that you all do is just...
Well, we could do a lot more. It's a blessing to be able to do it. It's kind of be able to turn your legal skills to do this sort of thing and have the team of people that we can work with, and eager people that want to be engaged in these battles, and people who want to be involved can be involved, because again, we shift resources to support these cases.
Right.
And then we find a few who tend to be the more that we think long-term will have a huge impact once we succeed, but then also do the accountability phase of the project. It doesn't end once you solve it. You also have to be, in some of these cases, do accountability. So the law and the policy become a tool. And we think if we find like-minded liberty warriors in the hemisphere, for example, that we'd be able to affect change over time. Yeah. And it takes time.
Let's bring it back to America.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about the Whitaker Chambers Farm?
What do you know about Whitaker Chambers?
I only know what I read in your website, to be honest.
Yeah, it's one of the early projects. My law partner and I are very good friends, Mauricio Tamargo, who I've known for a long time. That's one of the early projects. I mean, Whitaker Chambers, we could do, again, another show on Whitaker Chambers. If anybody's never read this book, it's called Witness, okay? It was written by Whitaker Chambers, and it's one man's journey, basically. It's a classic, by the way. If you're engaged in the conservative movement, you need to read Whitaker Chambers' Witness. It's one of the books Ronald Reagan used to keep in his library. It's a heavy read. First half of the book is his journey through from being a communist, and he was in the communist movement in America. I mean, he talks about all of it.
Wow.
And Alger Hiss and all of that, penetration of our government by the communist. He was part of, one of those cells. But he found God. I'm not going to give away the story. It's a good read. It's a heavy read, but it's worth a read, especially if you're a freedom thinker. It's a good piece. And the second half of the book talks a lot about more contemporary things, but it gives an instruction, a guide for that time frame in that movement. The farm, okay, we're skipping over a lot, but the farm is a National Historic Landmark. It was during the Reagan administration. I think it was designated a National Historic Landmark. That was very controversial. Reagan did that. Oh, my God. The left doesn't like... In fact, the left despises Whittaker Chambers and say he's a liar and that all that he wrote in that book was made up, and there's all this back and forth. And it's just phenomenal read. So I recommend the book.
That makes me want to read it even more.
It's a good book. It's an awesome book. But that farm... And your viewers can look this up. Just Google Whittaker Chambers Nixon. And he hid the evidence. Okay? I'm not going to give away the book, but I'm going to give you a little nugget. You can read the book. So he had in his possession some microfiche. You know what microfiche are, right? Those old school... it's kind of an old way of saving data before the internet. Kind of photography records. He had a bunch of records that had been photographed. He rolled them up. He had his microfiche again. Read the book. And they were hidden on his farm inside pumpkins, hollowed out pumpkins. Anyways, I'm going to just Google it and look for it. Fast forward to why we got involved with this. Because there were some encroachments coming from the government, local government in Maryland. There were some zoning disputes, some things that were happening where the family was concerned that the farm could have been, some things could have happened to the farm because they were potentially trying to do unlawful takings. Never got to that. But we were involved. We helped out. And Mauricio was very involved with that case. And fortunately, the farm is there and that we know of, it's fine. And it's a project to help make sure that important place in history, Cold War history. If you're into the history of the Cold War, you need to know about Whittaker Chambers and the farm and the pumpkin and the microfiche and the pumpkin and Richard Nixon on the property. And there's all these pictures. And that was a property rights case to make sure that the local government did not encroach on the rights of the family and the farm to function as a farm and as a National Historic Landmark.
What do you think about all these monuments and things that are being removed and
that's crazy.
Names being switched around?
No way. I was in Virginia during all that debate, and I was shocked. In fact, near our office is an Old Town. During the pandemic, in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia, there was this very famous statue that had been there forever in the center of the road. And during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, the city government, City of Alexandria, it was a monument dedicated to the soldiers that died in the South from that part of Virginia. And they removed it. It was owned by a private family, a private foundation. But they were worried that the protests would result in the statue being defaced or destroyed. So for some reason, we weren't involved with that. It was removed. So I drove by when the statue was gone. And then the next week or two, they removed the pedestal, the city did, at night. They paved over the road, monument's gone. It's not there anymore. And this is like 10 miles or so away from Mount Vernon, our founding father's home and birthplace, a place I love to go and I visit frequently. And it's shocking that sort of behavior is being tolerated in our country. That's the sort of thing you see in communist Cuba or communist China. And in Virginia, it was ground zero for a while out there in Loudoun County, the big battle with, critical race theory. That continues. That's still raging. And
really?
It's still raging, but in a good way, because it's a new generation of political activists that surfaced and got engaged with the school boards and parents, your daughters. You start trying to poison your daughter's mind, you're going to say something. No, you're not going to let it. And schools have no business doing that.
No.
So that whole period was rough. I think you need to leave your history out there, good and bad.
Yeah.
You're trying to erase history. You're also erasing your culture and your identity. And nobody's saying our country's perfect, far from it, but we're pretty darn good. And we're pretty darn good at healing. And I believe all this is a weaponization of our history. There's a lady in Virginia who's a recent arrival from China. She's been on Fox News a few times and done the talk radio circuit. And she compares it to the Maoist type brainwashing. It got nothing to do with the statues. It's just a narrative. By the way, narrative has been happening since the Cold War. This whole division business about the Russians were masters at it during the Cold War, and they're probably still at it, so are the Chinese, of using that type of information warfare nonsense on us, on our people. So it's serious. And I do believe it has an international flavor to it. And I'm a little bit disappointed at the conservative movement, mostly the Republican Party, because they were cowards. They did not push back on this. They allowed it to happen.
I never understood that reaction or lack of reaction. Because
they've lost the stomach to fight. They were playing defensive politics, and Governor DeSantis, to his credit, is a new generation of Republican, and he pushes back on that nonsense. And we're seeing other governors. In Virginia, we have Governor Youngkin now, he's pushing back on that. So these are new leaders that are coming into our movement, and they're going to be tested, and we're going to be watching them. But again, it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. That whole ugly phase is not over. That's just the opening shot. They are going to keep at this. They are not going to stop. Whittaker Chambers talks about this in his book. Even though he wrote this during the Cold War, he deconstructs the mind of a communist. Let me tell you, it's an intense read. It's not a happy read. The first half of the book is rough reading, a little dark, has its dark edges, but it continues. And this manifestation of the statue removal is just one aspect of it. The defund the police movement, the critical race theory that they say doesn't exist but does, the rewriting of history, the balkanization of our country. I'll give you one little anecdote. I know you're running out of time, but I want to give you a quick.
No, we're okay.
I want to give you a quick anecdote about something that happened in D.C. many years ago, involving the Smithsonian Museum. And this is going to make me a lot of frenemies for saying this, but I didn't support, for example, the creation of another museum on the mall. The National Mall, you have the Capitol on one end, Lincoln on the other end, the Washington Memorial in the middle, and you have all these museums between the Capitol and the Washington Memorial, and some others sprinkled around the city. Now they wanted to build this other museum of Latino history. And I was like, wait a minute. What are we going to start doing here? We're going to start building up museums for every single... The Museum of African American History, by the way, is different. Different in the sense that with the whole Civil War, those things that happened, it's a different museum. Right. When you start then balkanizing all the other groups, we have a Museum of American History right there, right next to the African American History Museum. Now they're going to build another museum, the Latino history. Look, I'm proud of my Hispanic roots and my ancestry, but I'm American. I'm not anything else. People ask me, what are you? I'm an American, period. Oh yeah, my parents were Cuban. But I don't want to be hyphenated my whole life on something. I went through that, by the way. I spent my first few years in Washington having to explain to people why I sounded the way I did. Well, I didn't grow up with that. Yeah. But they want to know you. It's natural. People want to know what tribe you're a member of and all that. But I'm American. Mm-hmm. I'm not Cuban American. I'm an American of Cuban ancestry.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of my Cuban roots. But the moment our country starts to divide that way, and we accept it, that balkanizing of our people, that's creating disunity, division. We have a constitution, we have a Declaration of Independence, we have founding documents, we have a good system. I think it's an ingenious system for its simplicity. It's a very simple system, separation of powers. It's been duplicated, but it will never be perfected by anyone else but us. I believe that. And we get off on these tangents, spending taxpayer money on a museum system that now is going to, I'm telling you, they're going to create another ethnic museum at some point. That's not American. And Republicans voted for it. I mean, there was a great piece, I don't know if it was the Wall Street Journal or the Hill newspaper, by a few of the people who initially, on the conservative side, who initially supported it, who said, we made a mistake. This is about 2 weeks ago. Because why? Because they're trying to rewrite American history. Okay? And we have to push back on that sort of thing and not be shamed into keeping quiet. Were our founding fathers perfect? No. But nor are any of these people we have here today.
Far from it.
I mean, come on.
At least our founding fathers founded something.
They founded something.
And something that's obviously working because we're all here.
And they sacrificed, by the way, a lot. A lot of our political class today is very spoiled. All right? They had the benefits of liberty and freedom. They're not losing their businesses. They're not being jailed. They're not being hunted down by the British. Mm-hmm. They're not putting everything on the line. These men and women did. So when you compare what they did to the way our political class acts today, there's no comparison. Some of these politicians got to Washington, the first thing they're thinking about was writing a book. I mean, do something for God's sakes. Yeah. Write a book. Come on. It's ridiculous. Why do you think Trump had such success? We knew Trump was going to win the nomination.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we knew that. We when I say we, I mean those of us in Washington who've been there a long time. It's not because we were magical sages or anything, but we saw in the Republican Party this professional cookie-cutter politician that kept going to Washington, saying one thing and doing something else. Mm-hmm. How many years have we heard Republicans saying, oh, let's cut the federal debt.
Yeah.
Oh, let's cut regulations. Oh, it's in the Department of Education. Oh, come on, we can rattle these off. You know what they are. Eventually, people stop believing you. Look at our debt. Look at our debt. That to me is a bigger danger than anything that's happening over in Ukraine, for God's sakes. And now they want to come after, by the way, crypto. They want to come after new markets. They want to come after crypto, new markets. They're trying to criminalize with a regulatory superstate the free market. That's what they're doing. But people seem to be okay with it. So I think we're balkanizing our society in a way, getting back to your question. And it's just that we have politicians that haven't been held to account. And we need to change that. Because if we don't, the left's going to keep, it's not monuments only. It's not about the monuments. It's about reshaping and dissolving what you and I know is America. That may sound kind of extreme, but it's a battle that's going to fall to your kids, probably.
No, I mean, I am there with you. I was still in the classroom when the whole take a knee started. Oh. And for the life of me, I could not understand what was happening. Because I have a classroom full of 80% immigrants who should be so grateful that they're sitting in a classroom with AC, Nikes on, iPhones in their pockets, food guaranteed in 3 hours, books and laptops. And here they won't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance because...
Well, you could take the knee to insult your country, but you could take the knee to insult your country, but then...
And I remember
prayer?
In that particular class, it was such a large class, I had to have a co-teacher. And my co-teacher just looked at me going, what the hell is going on? And I was like, I'm going to step outside because I need to breathe.
Wow.
And then I'm going to come back in. Wow. And we're going to try this all over again. Because I want to respect your ideas and your reasoning for things. But at the same time, you know, there's been that narrative, and now we see it all over, of being ashamed to be an American.
That's what they want.
And people die.
That's what they want.
To be an American.
Amen. Look what happens
here
90
you
miles
are
away.
sitting, I don't want people to know I'm from America. What? I don't get it.
Well, it's a narrative that's not just... first of all, it didn't happen overnight. And it's been coming for decades. And it's something that the international left fights against because they know that the promise that we have, individual independence, you take control of your life. I want to drive an SUV. I have one. I'm proud of having a gas-guzzling SUV. And it doesn't make me any less of a steward of the environment. All right? But that's not what they want. They don't want you to be free. They want you to be running around in public transport. Mm-hmm. They want to control you. It's all a form of control. We don't want to think that, but it is a form of control. And you saw it during the pandemic.
I agree with that. And I think it goes down to the most basic, which is they've taught us to equate our morality or each other's morality with our political parties.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's just so dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Just because I tell you I'm conservative or I'm a Democrat, now you can feel safe. You can say, "Oh, she's a good person. You know, she's a Democrat. She's a Republican. She's a good person. She has these qualities." And that is just so far from the way human nature works.
And most people don't think that way, except that when they get to your kids at a young age, which is what's so worrisome. When they get, especially into the public school system, which I don't call them schools anymore, I call them indoctrination centers.
Indoctrination camps.
That's what they
absolutely
are.
right.
They look like prisons.
Yeah.
Some of our schools look like prisons, the outside of these schools, and they're indoctrination centers.
I don't know how it's working right now, but I know that last I was there for 10th grade, we were given a book. All novels were removed. We were given a book that was all nonfiction, so articles, and a script. You had to read from the script. And if someone walked in and you had gone off on your own, you had gone rogue, you knew there were going to be consequences. You would get in trouble.
Is that why we're losing teachers from the teaching
I
the public school
believe
system?
that's one of the main reasons, because we're no longer autonomous beings. We are these robots that need to read from scripts, and you need to say the right thing all the time.
So the teachers, I think, do they push back on the testing, or it's not the qualification? They push back on they're not allowed to teach? I mean, what's the issue, you think? Or it's just that you don't have autonomy in the classroom anymore? I mean, you can't be yourself and craft a lesson plan the way you want to.
So it's been 5 years since I stepped away, but when I was there, last I was there, it was very much like that. Yeah, you had very little autonomy. Very, very little.
Imagine exposing kids to that at a young age. I don't know how people... I mean, I was lucky. You know, my parents sacrificed a lot to put us through Catholic school.
Yeah.
Because my parents didn't... They felt, I don't want to put them in public... My wife went to public school. She's the smart one of the two. Graduated with honors. I mean, she is. I mean, she was a good student. Very good student. Very bright. And she went to public schools. And she had a good experience. But when she came home... Mom and Dad were there.
They had to check
everything,
to make sure everything is okay.
Everything was checked. They were getting a second education at home. I don't know if you can even do that today, given that both parents usually have to work. But the public school systems back then are not what we have today.
No,
and I think most teachers,
they
are. And even in Virginia, where I thought we have some good schools in Virginia, I've been told that by teachers who've left, that they're indoctrination places. I mean, it's getting, and they don't pay them well.
And I feel for those teachers that are still in it and are working hard and are trying their very best to really provide quality education to those students, but it's so difficult because they have zero support.
And a note on your students, by the way, with the phones. You brought a thought. You reminded me of something. You know, when I was going to school, as I mentioned to you, my parents wanted us in Catholic school. So they had to work. You know, my dad was an auto part salesman. My mom was, working as a manager in a beauty salon business that she didn't own it. She was just working for. So they had to work.
Yeah.
To scruff it out. I didn't know how much until much later in life. But I've been working since I was about 13 years old and going to school full time. I was doing both because I wanted to help them out. I didn't think, it's a lot of work for them. And that's what we did back then. And it taught me at a very, very young age the value of hard work.
Right.
And we didn't complain about it. We just did it. And I didn't have all those tools that people have now. Computers. I mean, I went to school the old-fashioned way.
You had to use a typewriter.
Go
to the library. Because there was no Google.
No Google.
Yeah.
So now you have all these wonderful tools at your disposal. And you can go to school wearing $100 shoes or $200 shoes that maybe you can't afford. And
the Gucci belts.
All that stuff And I see this new generation coming out there's all these, like you said, I want to hide being American. And there's almost like this shame factor about, and I don't quite understand that because America's not that way. America's always about building yourself up no matter what. You don't complain, you go, you build. And there's opportunity here. At least when I was growing up, there was opportunity. If you worked hard, there's no free lunch. Even there's nothing in life. All my clients who've been successful clients, for example, none of them had it handed to them. None of them. It's all tough. Now we're creating a generation of people who we're trying to shield them from suffering and pain and work.
We don't give them the tools to deal with that inevitable aspect of living. It's tough. It's so tough.
But I think people are waking up to that.
I hope so.
I think so. And the pandemic, by the way, shook the America to the core. So what the left wanted to do didn't work. It had the opposite effect. I think so too. I believe. And I think I'm very hopeful that people are taking more control of their lives and they're taking more ownership of what's happening to their kids. And I've said it multiple times today, deregulate, respect property rights, and get government out of the way. All right?
Yeah.
You do that, you let people get out there and build and build and build and rebuild and remake this great city that we have here, for example. Good things are going to happen. But the moment you start tinkering with that and you start having government meddle in people's lives or telling them what to do or eroding their fundamental freedoms through regulatory tyranny, because it's real. It's not just federal regs. Federal regs trickle down, all right? They trickle down into state, local, and municipal regs. Then they start regulating up here. And you got the tax code hanging over you. And most families working like beasts to send more than half of their income to the federal government effectively. And you're just destroying free enterprise. So I think people are waking up to that, and that's a good thing.
How can people support the GLA?
Well, you're supporting GLA. I mean, you're helping shine a light on some of the work that we do, and that's a big help. So share her show. Support folks like this podcast because we need liberty warriors. You're a liberty warrior. I mean, you're out here spreading the gospel of free speech and debate and discussion. And that's good. And that's one way you can be an effective liberty warrior. Of course, we take donations. Our goal, though, is to become self-sufficient. And we've talked about this before. We before the program, we like to be able someday to be completely crypto-based type operation where we create something and get rewarded for it based on what you're producing and supporting. So there's many ways.
That's going to be so cool.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
But right now, yes, we'll take donation of time and money. So anybody wants to donate time, you don't have to be a lawyer to help. If you know someone out in the region, Latin America especially, although we work cases in the Middle East also, and we have done some work in Europe on working group arbitrary detention cases. If you know lawyers in those parts of the world who want to get involved and volunteer their time and help us build networks, let us know, because we are connecting groups of people. And that's part of the initiative, is to find like-minded folks who want to, especially lawyers who want to defend and work in these type of cases, defend fundamental rights, but from a free enterprise focus. All right, it's very important. It's very different from the other approach.
Keywords.
Yes, those are buzzwords. Yeah, so let us know, because we would love to connect with them. We will head out to your place if we have to, virtually or physically, and recruit and help bring people on board and help train a new generation. We're also we've taken many interns from law schools. Here at FIU, we had a large crop of interns a few years ago.
That's my alma mater.
It was, so I went there undergrad.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Before I went up, that's where I did my political science.
I love that school.
It's a good place, good people, and our first crop of interns came out of FIU, and then we've had some from George Mason Law, FIU Law, and some other schools. So we recruit from there as well, and we have a lot of cases, a lot of work. So we can always recruit, especially Spanish-speaking folks that want to help do this sort of thing. We will assign you a case as well.
And if someone needs your help, what's the best way?
Go to globallibertyalliance.org. There's a tips line there. You'll find on the top of the website, you'll see tips, and you can email us directly. That's a secure email, but you can also reach out to us through other applications, and just reach out to us via email. You'll find it on our website under the tips number.
On your mission statement, you have a quote. which I loved, from America's founding father and second president, John Adams. It says, there never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide.
Well, we're living it right now.
If you could spend the day with any American historical figure, who would you choose?
George Washington.
George Washington?
Not a doubt. He's my favorite, all-time favorite historical figure. I know that's kind of old sounding.
No, not at all. I mean, if you're going to pick one, I can see why.
I go to George Washington. I think that's who I'd start with. I think he's one of our most underappreciated founding fathers.
Which day out of his life would you spend with him?
I'd want to spend time with him when he was surveying. He used to be a surveyor. And I just wanted to connect with someone who was in his formative years. I know the rest of his life, right?
Right.
I just want to know what he was doing when he was surveying Virginia and going to other places, and then lead up to when he was first deployed and got engaged in the Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of, sounds kind of odd, right? You know,
no,
such an
not
old
at all.
Founding father, but he'd be the first historical figure I'd like to spend some time with. The next one will probably be Thomas Jefferson. You know what's the theme? Virginians.
Yeah.
Then George Mason would be the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the three that I would like to spend some time with. They all come at it from three different ways.
Those are some good ones. I think I would choose.
Who would you pick?
I would choose, and just because I feel like I'm slightly obsessed. I don't know what this is about me. Abraham Lincoln.
Abe Lincoln. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I would love to be in the audience when he was doing the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Okay.
Oh my God. That'd be
intense.
If somebody invents a time machine.
They will. Maybe metaverse or something. I don't know.
Yes,
exactly. Bring these things to life somehow.
We can use the Oculus and sit there and just let him do his thing.
What about ancient history? How far back would you go, do you think?
Oh my gosh.
Or any other historical figure that's not American? Anything.
Well, I for sure would like to go to the Library of Alexandria.
Okay.
Yeah. And just like see what the heck is going on, right? Like I want to see all these books.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know. Plato. I want to talk to him and see where Atlantis was. He could tell us.
He could tell you where it is. Find the treasures.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah, I think him.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Maybe Jesus.
That's where I'd go.
Because I wanna hear it from the horse's mouth.
That'd be nice to see that. I'd like to be there, Sermon on the Mount, maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
That's the only other person I probably want to kind of time warp with.
Right.
Maybe someday we will. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know what's going to happen. Father Eddie. I know I should not have answered that way. He knows I'm joking.
Oh my gosh. Hopefully he doesn't judge us too harshly.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
After all, we're just people. We're just people doing the best that we can. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite book?
Bible.
Bible?
Yeah.
Do you revisit it often? Daily, yeah.
Yeah. And write on it. I know some people say you shouldn't write in the Bible, but
no.
I do.
I think that's the only way.
I'm on my second one now. The first one I've had to shelve because...
Which is your favorite version?
I use the Catholic Study Bible. Yeah. I've used others. The first one I went through that I kind of tore to shreds was the Dewey Reams edition of the Bible, which is a little more... It's language that you kind of don't hear about anymore. You don't use that version as much. So I'm now using the Catholic Standard Bible right now.
Have you listened to Dr. Peterson's religious lessons?
I've heard a few of them.
Do you like them?
Yeah, they're pretty good. Pretty intense. They make you think. They make you think.
Yeah.
They make you think.
So good. But he's living, thankfully. I would love to spend the day with him.
You should invite him to your podcast.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? I would freak out.
Why?
It's Dr. Peterson.
No, I think he'd be a great guest here.
He would be a great guest. I would not be such a good host.
Yes, you would.
The whole time I would just be like, oh my God.
No, you'd be fine.
It's Dr. Peterson.
You'd be fine. So yeah, Bible's it's kind of the one book that I've read a lot. Still don't understand all of it. And I always get something new every time I read.
I mean, that's why it's the Bible,
Yeah.
because it's just so dimensional and deep.
It's all there.
I feel like with every stage in life that you visit it, you gain something.
It kind of came together. A lot of it came. Some of the books of the Bible, especially the older ones, came to in the Old Testament. I mean, when I went to Israel a few years ago, and was one of the most, I guess, for my wife and I, it was we've been able, like I said, we've been blessed. We've been able to travel places and see things. That place was just phenomenal, and how it crystallized. A lot crystallizes for you that you think you know. At least for those of us little Bible geeks, that it was just interesting to go to those places that you've been reading about your whole life, and being able to spend time behind the wall, for example, and see all those books, Torah inside, behind the Holy of Holies. It was a neat experience. And now with the city of David opening up this whole new section that brings to life that part of Jesus' life, to see where he walked in certain parts of what maybe you got to just folks haven't seen it. Go to City of David, just Google City of David, and just look at some of what they've done there. It's a phenomenal. It's not an exhibit. It's just living history.
Right.
It's still there. You can feel it. So if you read the book and you've been there, it's just phenomenal to be able to bring the Old Testament to go to the New Testament and see it.
That's
so
amazing.
It's neat. It's neat.
What do you think about the agnostic gospels?
I've read.
They're all right.
I read.
Yeah.
But no, I just focus on the Bible. But I have read. I will read some of those. I've read things that maybe Catholics are told not to read, maybe sometimes.
I think we're on the same vein.
But I think it's okay to educate yourself and have a wide knowledge and challenge yourself. My faith is strong. I'm not concerned about that sort of thing. So, but I have read.
Yeah. I just think they're interesting. To think that someone had a different point of view.
Yeah. But then that helps you understand how our books came together.
Right. Why those were the ones that were chosen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it kind of does when you spent time reading them, the Gospels, and you look at the agnostics, it kind of does make you better appreciate why the Bible's set up the way it is. Yeah. And by the way, we're still arguing about, some groups still argue about what should be and shouldn't be in the Bible.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
It's still going on.
I don't think that's ever going to stop.
Never. I think it's never going to stop.
And, was Jesus married? and the whole, I don't think we're ever going to stop discussing that.
Maybe one day we'll know.
But, yeah.
But I believe in the Bible.
Yeah.
That's my compass, if you will.
I think every person on the planet, whether you're Catholic or not, should read the Bible at least one time.
Be good. It helps. Understand our communities and our peoples.
I don't think there's, and people let me know their opinion on this, but I don't think there has been a book that has been able to look so insightfully into human nature as the Bible.
Oh, John 3:16.
Yeah.
It is a good, even for non-Christians.
Yeah.
I think it's a good, for them, it's maybe a philosophical read. Mm-hmm. But I know political prisoners who went into prison as atheists or agnostics, got their hands on a Bible, and came out true believers.
Yeah.
And found God. In fact, I know political prisoners who found God in Cuba, in China, just because they were able to get a few pages of the Bible without knowing what they were reading. So I think it's a remarkable work, and folks, yes, they should read it.
I have one last question for you. Mm-hmm. Dealing with all these heavy cases and how dirty politics can get, mm-hmm. how do you keep going? How do you keep that fire to stay involved?
My wife, we've been happily married now 27 years, I think. Known each other 30. And it's just my mission. This is what my station right now is, to do this. And I've always had maybe a tolerance for being able to do some of this and not take myself too seriously, that I'm blessed that I could do this sort of thing. Hopefully we're doing some good. And when you think about, you have a very finite time in this world. So we try and we urge our friends who join our network and people who we work with, hey, make the most of it. And if this is what you're called to do, you do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think. Maybe someday God will tell me something else. I don't know. But I enjoy it. It's hopefully something that we can build upon for other people. And in some cases, how can't we not? When you have your, you can choose to look at things and be indifferent, but then you're giving up. Mm-hmm. You're indifferent, just giving up. For some reason, some of these cases chose us. We didn't choose a lot of these cases. A lot of these cases came to us. So we've been involved doing this sort of work since we were kids, almost, in different capacity, right? So we were exposed. Yeah. We talked about hunger strikes. So maybe I was numb to it. I don't know. No idea. I think my faith is a huge factor too.
It helps you stay balanced.
Because there's a lot of good in this world, but there's also a lot of bad in this world. And we're never going to get rid of the bad. It's a constant battle, I think, between good and evil. But we can engage in it. We can choose to be indifferent, or we can look away and find people who can help you and chart that path, let's say, to deal with some of these cases, some of these problems, or you can just lean in 150%. I've been lucky I've been able to do it, frankly, because I wanted to have my law degree for something other than just doing transactional work, which I love, by the way. I've done a lot of that also. But right now, this is where I want to use these skills and find people who enjoy the sort of work, bring them along and see where we go with this thing.
Well, I think what you guys are doing is more than valuable. I don't think there's a word that I can place on how important your work and this organization is.
But there's many of us there's many of our groups out there, though, believe it or not. And we just, the fact that we can bring these things together and do it, it's quite remarkable. And if people knew the network of people that support this sort of thing, it gives me a lot of optimism. So it's hard to see some of the things that we see. Some of the things that we see probably are the darkest, I guess, of sometimes you see of human nature. Mm-hmm. But, one of the worst things you could do to someone, for example, is just to deny them their freedom. Example, right? But when you deny someone their freedom and you also don't give them a shot to get out of that jam, that's even worse, I think. And then you see the inhumanity of how people can treat each other. How can you not engage in that space to try and, at least we believe, those of us who engage in the profession, that we can do something about it.
Yeah.
And it happens every day.
And tip the scale back,
Keep balance, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
And it happens every day. Every day in this town, every day around the world. The world is better every day because people engage and choose not to look away. And it happens not just with lawyers. It happens with everyone, with teachers, with police officers, with anyone, as long as you're trying to do good. I mean, look what happened here recently in Miami. You had that lady, remember who she hit that little boy and then looked at him and walked away? She got caught. And justice will be done.
Yeah.
So that's the exception. So there's a lot of good in this world, folks. Don't leave thinking that everything's horrible. It isn't. And don't let the media-controlled complex let you believe otherwise. It's not that way. But there's going to be some rough spots in this place, and for some reason we've been thrust there. So we'll keep at it as long as we can.
Perfectly said.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny, for having us.
I can't end it on a better note. And with your permission, we want to dedicate this episode to victims of tyranny and authoritarian governments throughout the world, but specifically Cuba and Latin America. And with that, we want to encourage all of you guys to check out the GLA website. It'll be linked down below, along with all the other things that you mentioned.
All right.
And support them and share this episode with people you feel it will cause an impact. And as we always say, time is a top currency, so thank you for spending it with us. We appreciate it so much, and we will see you next time.